across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good morning. Yes, welcome to the Home of Common Sense. Ian Collins in for Jeremy Kyle. It's, as ever, the news keeps on coming. Bit of a theme here this morning, and it ain't pretty when it comes to law and order. Protesters have demanded police release descriptions and CCTV footage of the men suspected of gang raping a woman outside a church in Surrey. The police are investigating after several men attacked the woman in Epsom in the early hours of Saturday morning. This is despite 6 trillion CCTV cameras. They failed to release a description. Yesterday, people had had enough. Protesters confronted the police. In response, the police whipped out the riot gear and blocked off the high street. An extraordinary response. We didn't see police in riot gear when several hundred feral teens were looting shops a couple of weeks back. What is going on here? Is it two-tier policing? And should we have the right to know the description of potential criminals? Details on that. And on that note, shoplifting has surged by, and this isn't even going to be any surprise anymore, 133%. We tend to glaze over these figures these days when we hear the stories. How has this once serious crime been almost decriminalised? Elsewhere, paedophiles who view indecent images of children are not being arrested. Ready for this? Because police forces are too busy, arguably arresting protesters looking for justice. The number of referrals to police for online child sex abuse has risen by 66%. How can our police be too busy to investigate the industrial-scale sexual abuse of children? How did we arrive in that peculiar, disturbing, horrific place? Meanwhile, and perhaps connecting many of this together, MPs have voted against a proposal to ban under-16s from using social media. This is the second time this has happened. The same social media that will dish up a healthy dose of shoplifting videos, sexual content that's off the scale, and the kind of violence that Tarantino couldn't dream up. But don't worry, the kids love it. Oh, and a new academic study is to compile a list of regional swear words and insults. I love this. These things differ from place to place, from a pranit in the southeast to a raj bampot in parts of Scotland and a mazzoline in the Midlands. What is your favourite word or insulting phrase? You can voice note those into us, by the way, and if they are a bit salty, don't worry, we will bleep the bad words. So go ahead on 0344 499 1000. That's also the number to call us on as well. And you can message on 87333. There's a word for that as well. Poppy Coburn is with us, assistant comment editor at The Telegraph. Morning to you, Poppy.
Good morning.
I don't imagine you being much of a swearer, actually. But having said that, I think you have sworn since you've been sitting in here for the last 3 minutes.
I have, although in fairness, I was talking about Sadiq Khan, so...
You were talking about Sadiq Khan, so it was heavily endorsed at this end and completely appropriate. In fact, I don't even think Ofcom would pounce on you for that on the basis of basic accuracy.
No jury would convict me.
No, not at all. They go, well, this is just a factual statement, surely. You can't convict somebody of this. But we were also having a little moan up about the temperature in the studio. When I first started in radio, one of the advice that some wise old sage-like character gave me who'd been in the industry forever, you know, I thought this guy was like 107. It turns out he's about 39. You know, I was just a youngster. And he said, never talk about things that go on in the studio because they're not relevant to the audience. So don't mention that the kettle in the kitchen isn't working. Don't talk about the fact the studio's cold. It's freezing in here.
I am wearing a massive
jacket. It is
jacket.
Freezing in here. Seriously. I got suspicious when I walked in and a penguin walked out. I thought, hang on, this isn't the normal state of affairs in this studio. Yesterday it was too hot. Today there is nothing at all. It was colder outside, apparently. So... Only just. There's a lot together. We will take voice notes on. I mean, swearing is interesting, isn't it? Because there's two arguments. One is that it's for lazy people whose lexicon is bereft of any kind of imagination or intellect. But for others, I mean, Stephen Fry is very strong on this, and he's hardly an idiot. Believes it's one of the most beautiful assistants in the English language, and when used just at the right time, even though it's not as if we've never heard all these words before, but when somebody uses a swear word, even one of the bad ones, at just the right time, it is just the most brilliant and hilarious thing.
It is.
It's the sort of thing that as you're about to drop off at night, you remember that moment in the day when somebody in the office said it and you start laughing again. It's just perfect.
Well, sometimes only a four-letter word will do, unfortunately. I do find it very funny when people are getting, wound up.
Yeah.
And it just kind of comes out. That said, I'm not going to swear. I'm not going to swear this time.
No, we're not sweary people here, you see. That's the thing. And there's a study going on. They're going to be studying at one university on words, because it differs regionally as well. So at Sheffield University, they're going to collate a list of regional swear words and kind of insults as well. So they don't have to be unbroadcastable. Just, you're as lazy as a whatever. Every now and again, you think you've heard every kind of sort of insult. We'll have a caller come out with something, and I just think, how have I never heard anyone say such a beautiful thing before? So we're up for some of those, and if they do contain a word that is a little bit on the kind of just nudging towards the salty side, don't worry, because Christian, our producer, he's got it's called a profanitator. And he can, I literally just made that word up, a profanitator where he can remove the salty bits so we can still enjoy your contributions. 0344 499 1000. I think the terms of insult are arguably funnier than the swear words themselves, but throw them into us on that number. Some serious stuff to start off with, Poppy. I mean, this is just extraordinary. A horrendous attack on a woman in Epsom at the weekend. This happened outside a church, which just sort of rather compounds the horror of all of this. We understand this was a gang-related attack as well. It was only about a year ago that the police, and this I think I'm right in saying was after Southport, when the police said, we will in future be releasing details of who we're looking for, or perhaps even who we've arrested. Nothing so far. It is now Thursday. This happened on Saturday, and we have no information. The police said, despite, we're looking into it, we haven't got clear descriptions. Now, Epsom, like anywhere else in the UK, has got 1 trillion CCTV cameras littered around. I think potential future victims have the right to know what somebody might look like. If you're looking for an 8-foot man with a ginger beard, then I think we need to know that in case you see that person.
We have to put this in context of the many, many sex attacks that unfortunately follow this pattern. And this is a particularly horrific attack.
Yeah.
As you pointed out, it's a gang attack that happened from a woman who was leaving a nightclub, and it happened in a public place outside of a church. And I hate to say this, but it's not the first time that an attack fitting that sort of description has occurred.
Yeah.
The one that immediately came to mind was Brighton, which is currently going through the courts, which was a woman who left a nightclub and was raped on the beach.
Yes.
Bournemouth Beach. And the men who are currently on trial are both asylum seekers. And that is why I think people are concerned.
Yes.
And they have a right to be concerned, because what's been happening over the last, nearly 10 years now, is places like Epsom that used to be relatively sleepy, calm, safe. I mean, it's Surrey, for goodness sake. It used to be a byword for boring suburbia, right? Nice, quiet life, right? Have been transformed. And they've been transformed without the consent of the people who live there, because the government, what it's done, as it has placed people, men, into these communities and essentially let them run riot. Now, we don't know what's happened in this case. We don't know. The police obviously haven't bothered to tell us what's happened yet. They claim that they don't have a description yet. But what I think is in the back of people's minds is this another case of the many, many examples we've had where an attack of this kind has happened from people that never should have been here in the first place? Why are women so afraid to walk home at night? Why is it, if you're from a small sleepy town in Britain now, you can't walk around by yourself? You can't get a little bit too drunk on a night out without fear that the most appalling thing that can possibly happen to a woman will happen to you. So the
counter-argument to that seems to be that what we're actually asking for is for us to judge on what someone looks like as to whether they might be guilty. We need to know so it can confirm our worst prejudices that, oh, look, it looks like an asylum seeker. So that's why there is an appetite for it. I don't buy into that, by the way, but that is what we constantly hear.
But even if that's the case, I mean, it's legitimate. It's a political discussion, right? Which is
100%.
Like, you need to know if crimes have been committed by asylum seekers, because you need to know then to speak to the government and say, why are you doing this? This is having horrific consequences for the community. But
also, one would assume that there is a usefulness in saying, this person was this tall, they look like this.
Here's a description.
There might be somebody who works with, when we do eventually get one, often somebody will say, it wasn't until the police mentioned the bright yellow hoodie that I remembered I knew, that kind of thing. So on a very basic level, I mean, giving us description. These people never heard of a wanted poster. I mean, it goes back hundreds of years.
It's a very strange, specifically British thing that's happening as well. Because if you look at crime shows in America, the first thing they say, like as immediately when a crime has been committed, you will get a police officer, a cop standing there, and he will give you a full description of what the suspect looks like to the best amount of their knowledge, because they are trying to find the person. I understand protecting the identity of the victim. Of course, you must protect the identity of the victim. But why do we have to protect the identity of the potential perpetrators of the crime? For what reason would you even announce that this has happened if you're not going to bother to explain to us who we should be looking out for in this investigation?
Indeed. Should we know a bit more the identity or the ethnicity, if that is the question, of a suspect? Should we know this straight away? If so, why? 0344 499 1000. I mean, this rather was born out of Southport, really, when, we were told at one point, and I can remember the Welsh choir boy we were looking for. And, of course, it wasn't a Welsh choir boy, so we had what was... Now, the police would say, look, if we'd have said we are looking for a young black kid whose parents were Rwandan refugees, would that have made riots worse than they were if they'd have said nothing at all? Again, back to what the counter point seems to be.
Well, the best way to prevent riots is to stop attacks like this from happening. If the police are really concerned about disturbances happening in the country, boiling over, these tensions rising, then do your job properly and don't let these attacks happen. And unfortunately, as we've seen in the Southport inquiry, there were many, many, many times that various government agencies could have intervened to stop Axel Rudabakana from doing this attack. And every time I read about an attack that eventually turns out to have been, so-and-so person with no fixed abode, or so-and-so person who's living in, the Britannia Hotel a few miles away, I go, well, sorry, but people have a right to know about this because it is what the government is doing to them.
Should we know the identity of suspects, or as much as they can give us? 0344 499 1000. You can message us on that number as well. It does seem extraordinary. This particular attack is now just shy of a week ago, and there is nothing that the police in Epsom are able to give on this. And their reasoning is, we haven't yet fully identified. Well, we're not expecting a date of birth and, all the specifics. But the idea that you can't, in a town that is absolutely covered with CCTV, in an area that is covered with surveillance capability, nothing? I mean,
another thing I remember is often police departments will put out CCTV footage saying, because we failed to find the suspect, we're now appealing to the public for information on so-and-so person that's committed a crime. You see it often with TFL, say, transport incidents. They'll then release the footage. And if you look at the news reports of when the crime occurred, it's happened like 3 years ago. So they waited 3 years to release the CCTV footage of this person to the public. By that point, the poor victim, whoever is victimised by this person, has been in agony for years. Not having a resolution to this traumatic thing that's happened to them. This person's still free to roam the streets, doing God knows what to people. How is that acceptable? I think there should just be really, really clear guidance for the police. As soon as you have a statement from the victim, as soon as you're clear and you've gone through CCTV footage and you've put together, to the best of your ability, a rough outline of what the suspect looks like, you should release that information immediately to the public.
Indeed. And also, I mean, do you remember Crime Watch? I know I'm a couple of months older than you, but, Crime Watch was such a big programme. The whole thing was predicated on images and CCTV. Here's the picture, here's the video, here's what we've seen, and they caught people literally by giving descriptions.
Yeah.
That was the whole premise of the programme.
That's such a good point. We've gone like the opposite direction, because it didn't used to be like this.
I don't think it did.
It didn't.
I mean, even in my local paper, they're looking for a 6'5", broad-shouldered white man or a 2'6".
You would actually get
tiny
a description
black man, whatever.
of the perpetrator.
It's pretty standard stuff. I'd have thought when you go to police school, isn't that like on the, right, first port of call, officers, wannabe officers, is get a good description of the person.
What was particularly strange about this case is that the police appealed for the public to come forward, anyone that might have information, but provided no information that people that can then come forward to in the public. If you'd seen a group of
psychic
men
abilities required
walking by at night, you'd have to have some rough idea of what these men look like. Otherwise, it's just people walking around at 3 in the morning. You wouldn't know.
No.
Again, I just think the government needs to intervene, and it needs to say, in every incident, we need to have clear and consistent guidance, because otherwise people just hide behind their hands and go, oh, well, we were following the procedures, we were following the best procedures. And again, sorry, everyone said they were following proper procedures in the Nottingham stabbing case. Everyone said they were following proper procedures before Axel Rudabakana walked into that dance studio. It's not good enough. Use your brain, use common sense. What is actually going to help apprehend the criminal? This
comes from Phil. Phil's in Coventry. Says, Ian, Epsom are the powers that be deliberately not giving a description, hoping that there are riots again, so that they can scream far right, throw more rightly sacred parents into prison and take the spotlight off this government. You are forced into that kind of thinking sometimes.
Yeah.
Your brain kind of takes you there, because in the absence of any other logic, what are we meant to think? Why would you not be telling us you're looking for 5 men, 4 at 3, whatever it is, and they're this tall, they look like this, they were wearing that, etc. Pretty simple stuff.
It's not baseless speculation. I get so angry when people go like, oh, people are just confirming their prejudices. Actually, what people do is they go in their brain and they remember things that have happened before, and they draw comparison points. And that, unfortunately, I think is what's happened here.
Now, look at this. This, for those who are watching us in vision, well, if you're watching us, it would be in vision, but for those who are watching as distinct from listening, you can see this is Epsom High Street, and the Riot police are out. I mean, this is not like, a couple of coppers who are holding a baton. This is the Riot police, because protesters have taken to the streets saying, we need answers. We need answers. There's a rape taken place. We're seeing this on a daily basis. Tell us who you're looking for. We need to know. That is their response. You didn't see that response when a bunch of feral teens were going nuts.
Well, there weren't any police at all.
Where was it? Clapham the other day?
Near where I live.
Right. Everybody lives in Clapham, don't they? We didn't see that kind of response. No. There's some community support officer popped up and said, I think they went that way. And that was it. Look. But there's dozens and dozens of them.
But I mean, probably about 50 or 60 police officers in full riot gear. But this is all people need to know, by the way, when you realise who's actually governed in this country. Like, who do the police actually exist to protect? Because what they clearly are afraid. They're afraid of people asking questions in Epsom. They're very frightened of that. They're very frightened it's going to turn in this totally legitimate protest. There's no evidence that it actually spilled out into anything violent, but they're afraid that it might. And yet, in the streets of London, when you see people looting, when you see gang violence, when you see people harassing, people just trying to get home, head down, go about their lives, the police are nowhere to be seen. They are more frightened of this, of people asking questions that are inconvenient for them, than they are about actual career criminals.
Yeah. This one from Carlos says, Ian and Pops. Do you get called Pops?
Often.
Do you?
Yeah.
Carl says, Ian and Pops. Carl's from up north, as he puts it. Yes, we should know the ethnicity of a suspect if they've potentially committed a crime. And I'm struggling to imagine that we would get anybody who would say, no, we shouldn't know about this. Ethnicity is the bit that people start to get uncomfortable with. Well, I mean, are we talking about you would always say a white, brown or black person.
Well, Howard, we just said that they're men.
Indeed. So the gender.
What's the problem? I mean,
so we know the gender. Problem? Is there any problem in releasing this? Surely, if nothing else, it would be helpful to potentially find them. I mean, I'm not a police officer, but I think that's the way it goes. You give out the description, then people... what will be the point in Mooch? Anyone in Epsom is going to be looking around going, well, there's a group of lads over there. Could it be that? There's another group of lads over there. Might help us if we can kind of nail this down a little more.
Well, if you take it to its first logical conclusion, and you don't want to upset all various groups about stuff, you would just release a suspect list saying it was a person of indeterminate gender, race, and height.
Yes,
who was
yes.
roughly standing or perhaps sitting in an area in a certain point of time. Like, sorry, you have to release a suspect list. It doesn't matter if it makes the police uncomfortable. It's about the victim. It's about getting justice for the person who's just been victimised. That's all that matters.
0344 499 1000. You can voice note us there as well. Should we know the identity and ethnicity of a suspect straight away, and specifically what would be your reasons behind that? I think we've covered the obvious stuff here. Reservations, is there something we've missed? Maybe all ears at this end. And we're taking calls and voice notes on a lighter point as well. Great regional insults and maybe swear words as well. Don't worry, we'll bleep them out, but do still send them. Same number, 0344 499 1000. You can message 87222. Time now is 23 minutes after 6. More from Poppy Coburn in a couple of moments' time. This is Talk.
He's just trying to take credit, Keir Starmer, isn't he?
This man is not a leader. He's not the statesman that our country needs. He's failing us at every single level.
Donald Trump understands that Keir Starmer is fundamentally not a patriot.
Yeah.
He's not on the side of the West. He's been appeasing the Iranians in order to shore up his vote in this country.
In front of me is Waitrose, and I'm about to head in there. I literally openly put the stuff in my bag. I nervously walked to the front door.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 0344 499 1000. 25 past 6. Poppy Coburn is with us. So much comment coming through on this subject this morning. Let's get a voice note on policing. Morning, Ian.
Good morning, Mr. Collins. Good morning, Pops. Always a pleasure. Ian from Holmfirth. Now, let me just get this straight. Our glorious leader wants to double down on the harmful content seen by under 16-year-olds on social media, but doesn't seem to be having the same outrage as everybody else when under 16-year-old girls are getting gang raped on an industrial scale by predominantly Pakistani Asian men. Now, that just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense at all. Also, the details of the Epsom gang rapers hasn't been released on any media outlet, and we can probably guess why. Because I'm guessing if the perpetrators had have all been white guys, it'd have been over every single media outlet that there was in the world. Anyway, ta-ra, folks. Keep smiling and paying your taxes.
That's Ian with a good old Romford accent there, as you probably gather. He makes a brilliant point on that.
Totally true. Totally true.
It's such a massive own goal for authorities, this, of course. And that's what happened with Ruba Cabana, because in the absence of any information, people start saying stuff on social media. We'll come to social media in just a second. And we know that that can be dangerous as well. So you get all sorts of speculation. It's always a friend of mine or a contact of mine, someone I know. You know, did you triple check, as you or I would have to do in our jobs, you know, to double source and whatever, the authenticity. No, of course, social media. People just write stuff. Oh, I've just heard that it's a woman called Mary.
Who does the government think they are? Why is it their prerogative to protect us from reality? Like, sorry, like...
Yes.
Sorry. I think we can handle the truth. Like, tell us the truth. Give people full information.
But they create the problem by not telling us.
No, because they don't want to tell us the truth because it's inconvenient for them.
But the inconvenience creates a bigger problem for them, and there's the own goal. I mean, it just seems ridiculous if you don't tell people. You can't continue lying
to people by omission forever. That's the truth.
Well, it brings us on to social media, of course, because yesterday we know that MPs voted for a second time not to ban social media for under 16s. Now, I reckon in all the years I've done this job, Poppy, this compromises me more than anything, because the idea of, you know, when I hear of governments banning stuff, I'm supremely uncomfortable with that idea. You also have that sort of phrase, thin end of the wedge, you know, the start of a difficult journey. That said, if I go home, as I will, I do go home every day, actually. If I go home after this job and sit on the train and have a little look at X, I can be dished up a beheading video. I can see graphic sex. I can see, and this isn't looking for it, by the way. This will just pop up. And don't believe that thing, oh, the algorithm only serves you up stuff because you've watched it before. That's not necessarily true, because you might have looked at somebody else's comment on one thing that led to something else, and then suddenly there you are seeing a child in a playground having their head jumped on. Then you're watching shoplifting, etc. This would be seen at best as distinctly adult content. This isn't something I want my 12-year-old son to be looking at. But legally, he's allowed to. I mean, what's the deal with this?
So,
banning it is always tricky, but how do we police this, or can we police it?
So, you know, I thought about this a lot. My mum works in a school. She deals with teenagers. She sees all sorts of issues that come from kids being glued to their phones, seeing unpleasant things on social media, etc., etc. One thing I will say, I grew up on social media. I mean, my mum was, by the way, she didn't let me have all the apps and things, but I had a phone, I had access to the internet. I probably did see things too young, but it didn't actually do any lasting harm to me, because you're a teenager, you kind of see gross out content, you go, oh, yuck, but you move on. One thing I will say about this is that it is a responsibility for parents. It is a responsibility for parents, because what the government is proposing will have consequences for you and I. We probably both want to spend less time on our phones. We probably both can accept the social media. Certainly it has its downsides. You know, I have something at home where I touch it to my phone and it turns it into a bit of a brick, and so then I can just sit and read a book, read a newspaper, and, you know, not think about the constant notifications coming through. But that said, I should have a right to social media, because there are times where you want to use it to communicate with people. You want to use the internet to kind of get information out, read things. And that is why I'm concerned, because there is no way that they are going to be able to roll out this ban on social media without age verification checks, which apply to you and I, which means you have to upload a picture of your face onto your phone, which will give the government a database of your personal information. The government, which, by the way, leaks constantly because they are rubbish at actually protecting your data, protecting your identity, and they will have control of that information. And I am not comfortable with that. I feel that it is digital ID through the back door. I feel it's using an issue that people find is very sympathetic to push forward something they want.
There's also a wider thing. I mean, Mark, one of our producers, just mentioned VPNs that people can use to, you know, cover up where they are, etc. So they can get through ID. We know in Australia
we're trying to ban those as well.
Indeed, yes. So you kind of go on this constant chase. But actually, if your central argument is about bad content, then we're not really talking about social media, we're talking about the internet. So it's a fool's journey, really, to go on this one, because, I mean, a couple of years ago, we took YouTube, which is, I mean, man alive. I mean, when you're a parent trying to get rid of YouTube, it's like, I think I'm on a reality TV show. You know, I feel I'm being watched, and Stephen Mulhern's going to pop out my wardrobe one day with a microphone and go, we got you on the old YouTube, Bruce. It's ridiculous to try and get, right, well, I can ban it this way, we can have the family sharing thing, you can ban this, you can ban, just keeps popping up. Anyway, deleted it the first time we went on this journey, deleted it from the iPad, and the iPad was used for two things, because also iPads are used for schooling now, so you get a lot of lessons, homework is dished up online.
Also,
so
parents are frightened of their children not having phones because they're the ones that are texting their kids.
Well, exactly.
Constantly.
There's all of that too. So anyway, go into his bedroom, and he's on YouTube. It's like, how'd you get on YouTube? And he went, Safari. Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
There's web versions of all of these things.
Yeah.
So that's all he did. So we had to go down that. That was another rabbit hole to go down. So it is difficult, but the point is, if it's about not seeing good content, not seeing content that's going to be disturbing, then that's an internet issue, not just a social media.
Of course, and it's a tricky thing for regulators to sort out. You know, I want these tech companies to take more responsibility for the stuff that they are showing people.
Yep.
I want them to crack down on particularly self-harm content, very suicide content. They have an absolute corporate responsibility to do that. But where I am uncomfortable is, you know, I know Labour MPs. If you speak to them about their concerns with the internet, they'll be pretty frank with you. They'll say, people are mean to me online. I don't like that people are rude to me on X. And rather than just logging off or growing a bit of a thick skin, they think that that behaviour should become criminalised. And that is where I'm concerned, because like that's not the issue that people
that becomes a free speech thing.
This is when
it becomes an overreach issue as
take
well.
an issue that's very sympathetic, that lots of people will have experience with their own kids, and they turn it into something that I think will be unfortunately quite a bit more sinister.
Yeah.
And I just do not trust the state with speech restrictions. You know, they've had those powers for about a decade now, and they have abused them. So why would I want to give them any more powers? I'm sorry. Let's put the pressure on the companies. Let's make the companies actually enforce their own regulations. As parents, let's try and stop these kids from going on the apps, because they are toxic for them. They're not good for them. But let's not give the government any more powers to regulate what we say than they already have. And
there is the problem, of course. I refuse to believe, by the way, you mentioned responsibility of Zuckerberg and Musk and people like that. It must be the easiest thing in the world right now. I mean, Elon Musk can send a rocket into space that can then reverse itself back into the pod that it just took off from. I'm pretty sure you can put a little algorithm in there that will stop dishing up a picture of a kid having his face smashed in with a hammer in a playground. I mean, I don't want to see that. In the same way that pornography, you know, when I was a kid, a child of the 70s, but, you know, at school in the 80s, you know, the only time you saw pornography was every now and again a random kind of page of a porn mag would be in the playground. I mean, this was the 80s. Porn back then was not what it is today, so I'm told. It was, you know, something, I mean, you know, bikini lines look like Brian Blessed, let's just put it that way. This was a very different era. And that's all you would have seen. Now, of course, what can be dished up in the hardest form of pornography is there. That could be got rid of. If Zuckerberg wanted to get rid of that fully, you just stick an algorithm and say that will never be shown.
To be fair, on Instagram, there already is relatively strict regulations in place. It's X that probably is the worst offender in terms of... Like, I use X probably too much, and occasionally I'll see things and I'll go, whoa, like, why has that come up on my feed? It will be, as you say, really violent content, or just really frightening or unpleasant. Yeah. And you're like, I don't want to see this stuff, you know, like, how has this come up? Yeah. There is a problem with that. But that said, also, you know, that's responsibility for the company. Like, the government needs to speak to the company and say, you know, you need to make sure that this stuff is not being... I mean, no one wants to see videos of violence. That should not even be an option.
To be honest, my problem with X is actually a rather slightly different thing. I've got an ongoing problem now with AI, because I don't know how many... I'm now struggling to know whether what I'm watching is AI or not. And then you scroll down, because you know somebody has asked Grok, and then you can find out for yourself, you know, is this video real? And you just watch something for 3 minutes, and it's actually completely fake. So there's that problem as well. There's quite a lot of that going on. And also just the insanity of, you know, I mean, the lack of clarity, the lack of any... I mean, it's just a wild west out there, isn't it? It is, yeah. And then, of course, you've got the people who are just trawling for clicks and the like. The more you see this video, the sooner you'll begin to notice. And that's all they put. And then they put a video of, like, Donald Trump just walking down a carpet, and you go, what am I noticing?
It's engagement farming.
You realise 17 million people have looked at this.
Well, the worst thing they did was actually you monetised it, because it then incentivised those people to produce stupid content.
Of course it does.
Although, again, going back to that government regulation point, the Online Safety Act was supposed to ban violent content online on these social media platforms. And one of the first videos that people noticed was being blocked under the Online Safety Act was a video of the Conservative Party MP, Katie Lamb, describing the grooming gangs crisis, reading out aloud an example from an Oxford-based grooming gang. And that was blocked from the UK. And I thought, if an MP speaking in Parliament is blocked on the grounds that it's inappropriate content, talking about, you know, that
takes us to exactly where the big problem is. More from Poppy in just a moment. 0344 499 1000. Social media, how do you deal with that with your own kids? And if you are dealing with it, how do you then stop them looking at the internet? Because that's where you'd find, you know, that if you want a greater choice of bad stuff, just a general search engine would serve that a bit any day of the week. And of course, we're talking about policing. Should we have the right to know the identity, ethnicity of a suspect straight away? Reference the Epsom case. On this very issue, let's get another voice note. Morning, Adrian.
Racism is absolutely rife across the United Kingdom, and everyone can see it. It's on display. And what is it against? Ethnically white people and Jews. Everybody else is protected and looked after and mollycoddled, but these other two groups, the white English and the Jews, are free targets because they have got to be the evil people in the entire world, and everyone else, we have got to understand their problems. And all those police in Epsom, that wouldn't come out for the poor girl being raped by a gang of people. I assume she was had sight, she could give a description, so we could know who. So the absence of a description gives all the information you need to know. I'm sick of this country.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good morning. Welcome back. Ian Collins in for Jeremy Kyle. So much going on this morning. We're absolutely chocker with messages, voice notes and calls. We'll come to all of that. Poppy Coburn is with us. Poppy is the assistant comment editor over there at The Telegraph. This comes from Keith in Nottingham. He says, not so long ago, when there was terrorist attacks in London, the government wanted the UK's population to come out and say our way of life would not be defeated. These days, the governments and the authorities are implicit in aiding migrants and people of certain ethnicities to break the law, and I'm afraid to say get away with their crimes, says Keith. Keith, thank you very much indeed for that. This from Dave. Is the fact that no information on the rapists from Epsom, could the government have one eye on local elections? That could be true. I mean, in theory, I know people will jump on this. The government wouldn't be involved at any level with this story of Epsom, other than if somebody asked the Home Secretary their views on it. But I can see why the suspicion rises in that department. Paul, living in Spain, says, morning to you both. The Epping situation is showing exactly the state the UK has become. The leftists say white men are just as culpable and dismiss talking about race because that suits their own narrative. In my opinion, the UK is already done for, and maybe that's why Paul is living in Spain. And Darren in Cornwall says, morning Ian, why can't we start suing the government for putting us in this situation? If I took someone to a place that got them harmed, then I'm just as guilty as the perpetrator. It makes me sick. I'm scared for women right now, which rather brings us on to this other story splashed on the Mail today as well. There it is, Labour's shameful betrayal of women. It was only a year ago, almost to the day, that the Supreme Court said a woman is a woman, and it's just kind of as simple as that. Didn't really actually take them very long, when you think about it, to work that one out. We all kind of knew it. 6-year-olds knew it. Everybody knew it. But it seemed to bamboozle the great campaigners, mostly on the left, who decided that there was another version of a woman, and that was a man who could be a woman. Now, he may just be a cross-dresser. He may just be somebody who around. I know there are potential nuances to this, and we'll come on to that. However, it appears that despite the Supreme Court ruling, Poppy, it's just being widely ignored. Well,
precisely. I mean, as you've just pointed out, it's a pretty simple ask, isn't it? What's the difference between a man and a woman? Yeah. What makes a woman, what makes a man? And yet, the government has been dragging its heels at every opportunity at trying to stop this from going forward. And we all know why. When Rosie Duffield was being bullied by her own party for years for just having the bravery to come out there and say, I'm not comfortable with having male-bodied individuals in women's spaces. You know, I don't want a male-bodied individual being in a women's changing room or a women's rape crisis centre, which is even more, you know, appalling. She was treated appallingly by her party. I mean, it's just ridiculous how awful they were to her. Are we then supposed to expect that overnight her party suddenly changes its mind and go, oh, well, you know, if the law has changed, if the Supreme Court has found that actually this is wrong, then I guess we'll just drop all the activism we've been doing for more than a decade and we'll just accept the findings. No, they don't want this to happen. Their base does not want this to happen. And so what they're trying to do is drag this out for as long as they possibly can until you and I and the rest of the country forgets, assumes that the issue has been sorted, and then they can start rolling it back again, rolling back these protections again. And I think, unfortunately, that's exactly what's happened.
This has happened. The kind of gender warriors are 100%. I feel so strongly about this point. 100% to blame for this. It's not some kind of right-wing onslaught of intolerance. This is not people on the right saying, you know, we do not recognise people's rights. I don't care what anybody wants to call themselves. They're absolutely entitled to dress as they please, call themselves whatever. What you cannot be is a gender agitator, and that's what many of these people are, these kind of ID fanatics about their own identity. A bloke, you see them on, you know, mostly those kind of smelly protesters on Green Party kind of, or sorry, Green issues, I should say, as distinct from party. They may be in the party as well, who knows? But some of those campaigns where, you know, a bloke is literally, and clearly a bloke, still with a beard, has put on a dress and says, I'm entitled to use the ladies' loo because I'm a woman. Because, they, you know, part and parcel of being on the extreme left is that you hate convention, you hate tradition, you want to mix things up, you want to disturb the status quo, you want to muck around with convention. That's kind of the shtick. That's the point of being on that curious part of the political spectrum. So that's what you do. Now, you haven't got any right to use a woman's loo. You're not a woman. You don't really think you are a woman either. Now, there will be some people who would say, well, hang on, 15 years ago we weren't talking about this, and there were trans women who looked like women. They'd gone through surgery. I mean, in cases that is true, who did use women's loos, and nobody said a thing. What's the deal with those people who have been living a quiet life with none of these arguments until the left wing began having them?
Well, I think they've been victimised by this culture war too, haven't they?
I think so too. They're blaming people like us. They should actually be blaming the culture warriors.
It was people who were trying to push this issue, which is very radical. I mean, it's literally the abolition of, like, sex categories.
Yes.
As just like the next crusade, who were taking the most maximalist approach, which is children should be giving life-altering drugs that will make them permanently infertile if they decide when they're like
5
teenagers that they're actually the opposite sex. Male-bodied individuals that still have their male genitalia intact should be allowed to go into women's refuges full of women who have been, you know, beaten up by their partners.
Correct.
Or have been raped. You know, you should be able to walk into a toilet regardless of the way you're presenting, and no one's allowed to say anything about you because it's how you feel inside.
And you should go to jail for discrimination if you are a gay woman who refuses to date a bloke who's calling himself a woman.
Exactly. Also, you should be allowed to change your birth certificate without any consultation, which I'm sure won't have any consequences for convicted criminals who maybe want to change their name and identity to hide from the law.
Indeed.
So it's basically them taking this position in the most insane way possible, going so far away from where the public opinion was, and the outcome has been that there's been a backlash.
Yeah.
People have rightly gone, whoa, 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 what's this? Like, what's this? This doesn't make any sense. I never asked for this. I never voted for this. You know, what am I, my teenage daughter, you know, if she goes to go to the loo, is she going to be attacked by someone, some strange person, I don't know who they are, who shouldn't be in there? You know, we know that men are more likely to commit sex crimes. It's just a fact. That's just the way things are. These protections exist for a reason, and that's why they have to be kept in place. And
they are being widely ignored, it seems. More from Poppy in just a second. 0344 499 1000. Your comments on that. Let's cross over stateside. Kinsey Schofield is with us, host of the Kinsey Schofield Unfiltered Show. Morning to you, Kinsey. Yet again, the gift that keeps on giving is Megs, as she now likes to be called. Call me Meg, she said. And, of course, the big H. Harry, they're down under, they're on Australia, and, well, MasterChef royalty, because you told us this yesterday. It's happening. Meghan Markle is on MasterChef, but down under.
I mean, I honestly feel like I'm interrupting a very important conversation between you and Poppy, much more relevant than what Meghan Markle's cooking up on MasterChef. But thank you for having me, Ian and Poppy. Thank you for including me. That's right. I mean, I think that more chaos down under, like to your point, Meghan Markle, you know, that the constant contradiction of, is she a duchess or is she a reality TV star? It looks messy. You know, another rebrand, Harry and Meghan, they still want us to believe that they are royal while they engage in these low-level entertainment ventures.
And she's apparently a guest judge, is that right, on the Australian?
Yes, because Meghan Markle is an expert on everything, Ian Collins.
Yes, indeed. And I did think to myself, I would have thought, look, I'm not an expert on cooking shows, but my tiny bit of knowledge on this would have suggested that if you're going to be not a competitor, not a contestant, but a judge on a cooking show, that you would have some kind of culinary background. In fact, not some kind, a fairly solid culinary background, you know, top of the tree in that world. You'd be a restaurateur, you'd be a chef, Michelin star, big name in the world of cooking. Or you could just be the girl that used to be in Suits on the telly who happened to marry a royal family member.
Mm-hmm. Deal or No Deal. I think it was Luggage 23 she had on Deal or No Deal. Yeah, and remember, I don't know if you remember the stories that came out of the Netflix drama, but when they were trying to develop with Love Meghan, that was one of the biggest issues. And so the solution was they would have legitimate chefs come in, but the legitimate chefs were a little boring, so then they had to throw in some celebrities that looked like they were in the middle of a hostage situation. But that was the solution on With Love Meghan. We'll have some real chefs come in. This was for season 2, where they cut everything up so that Meghan was not necessarily presented as the expert, because people were so annoyed in season 1 how everyone was oohing and eyeing over her. They got the memo, so they recut season 2 to make Meghan ask these legitimate experts quality questions, and so that they were being positioned as the authority in the kitchen and not necessarily Meghan.
On the front page of the Daily Mail this morning, Kinsey, here it is, how the Duke and Duchess of the Dollar, I love that, are now doing everything the late Queen wanted to avoid. This is not what Queen Elizabeth had in mind when it came to a modern royal family turning up on a baking show, for goodness sake.
Yes, sir. I mean, it's my understanding that the palace is unhappy about these rent-a-royal tours because it blatantly disregards the late Queen's very specific instruction that there can be no half in, half out for the Sussexes. And had she known that the Sussexes would bulldoze King Charles upon her death, I suspect she would have given more thought to stripping them of their titles. All they're doing in Australia is monetizing their titles and desperately clinging to royal relevance, despite the fact that most of Prince Harry's family refuse to take his phone calls to this day.
Yeah, that's quite telling, isn't it? If somebody doesn't want to talk to you, I think, you know, not to underplay it, there's something in that. I also read as well that over there in Australia, it culminates this tour in some kind of big show. There's like a retreat or something that people can pay $2,000 or whatever for, and then it culminates in Meghan making an appearance. You can have your photograph taken with her, and this was sort of billed as the big, you know, everybody's going to pile in. There's going to be queues round Ayers Rock to try and get to see this thing. And then yesterday they announced, oh, we got some last-minute tickets available. They can't even set up their own show.
It's classic. Yes, so this is Meghan's 3-day retreat where for $3,000 you can secure a group photo with her. Paid selfies with your favorite celebrity is a Comic-Con opportunity. It's not a British royal family move. And I feel like the Sussexes are so tacky and continue to earn comparisons to the shameless Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and Fergie with some of these moves. Unfortunately, though, Ian, the king is in a really difficult position, but I think he has to ignore the Sussexes because this is a very pivotal moment, and he risks distracting from the work he's expected to do. He's been called on by the UK government to mediate between Keir Starmer and President Trump at the end of this month in DC, and any mention of Harry takes away from that crucial assignment. So, you know, he's in a really difficult spot right now.
Indeed. Kinsey, have a cracking day. Thank you for being with us as ever. Kinsey Schofield, host of Kinsey Schofield Unfiltered. Check it out if you haven't seen it already. Thank you to her. More from Poppy in just a couple of moments as well. Loads more stories to look at. We'll take voice notes and calls and messages. 0344 499 1000. That's the number. 87222 if you're sending a message. It's Ian Collins in for Jeremy Kyle. 5 to 7. This is Talk.
Superior start to the news day. Talk Breakfast on Talk.
Welcome to Down the Local, the show that goes from pub to pub across the country, speaking to the punters about the subjects driving us all nuts at the moment.
I
don't really know Mega Muff. I know Mega Muff.
M77 at Junction 3
I don't know about anyone else.
And the
I don't know where this is
M40 all open
going.
now from
I have
Repair Works from Junction 11 at Banbury down to Junction 10 at Brackley. However, slow in London in Park Royal as
Is public transport good value for money?
No. Abbey Road by the Central Middlesex
You really don't like speaking to
Barrett's
people.
Green Road, and Great Western Railway services are suspended in West Ealing and Greenford.
On DAB Plus, Talk on your smart speaker, Talk on your smart TV, and on your side. The UK. This is Talk.
Good morning. Yes, welcome back. It is the home of common sense. Ian Collins in for Jeremy Kyle. It's a Thursday morning. Poppy Coburn is with us. Lots to talk about. Let's get a voice note. This comes from Danny.
Good morning, Ian. Danny from Bedfordshire here. In regards to the Epsom rape, no description is a description. We all know, like we all did in Southport, like we all have in various other illegal invader rapes and murders. So for the police not to give us a description is the description. Have a great day, mate. Keep up the good work.
Danny, thank you, mate, for that. Some great calls and comments on this. Poppy Coburn is with us for the last knockings of this hour. I did spot this one as well, again in the Sun. 179 lags wrongly released. I mean, how many more times are we going to read this headline? At least 3 prisoners are being let out of jail by mistake every week. Every week.
Every week.
So, I mean, I don't know how to run a prison, but I would reckon I could stop that.
Well, the one I always remember is, I mean, it's an awful story, which is Hadish Kabati, who was the asylum seeker who sexually assaulted a teenage girl and in Epping, and was let out of jail by mistake, was spotted walking around Chelmsford town with an avocado tote bag, managed to make his way to London, all before the police managed to actually catch him. So they were releasing photos of him as he's doing his grand journey across the UK. I mean, how do you manage to...
And he was high-profile well,
criminals.
Yes, exactly.
You know, how do you accidentally... He was also supposed to be deported. He wasn't even... He was never supposed to be released. So, you know, it does raise serious questions about, like, who's actually in charge of this stuff? How's that even happening? You'd
have to assume that when you're about to release somebody from jail, it's a bit of a moment, even if you've been in the prison service for years. You know, it's a moment. Right, here's the paperwork. Mickey Smithers, oh, he's a right toe rag, was old Mickey, prolific shoplifter, got himself 7 years in jail because he was quite violent as well. So he's down to be released, but he only came here 3 weeks ago. Hang on a second, this paperwork must be wrong. Does nobody... I mean, it's not one bloke sitting there with a moleskin pad working
maybe
out.
It is.
Maybe it is.
Maybe, I mean, again, it's this constant deference to process. I'm sure they go like, well, I ticked the box, you know, the computer told me to do it and so I did it. It's just no one bothers to actually think for themselves and go, is this a good idea? Like, does my gut tell me that this is the right situation? Does this person over here look the sort of guy that we want back on the streets? It's just a nightmare. It's a true nightmare.
Do you know what? We didn't even get time to talk about the greatest act of karma, and that is a pothole story. It was the Secretary of State for Transport, Heidi Alexander, whose official government car went down a pothole, nearly took the flipping wheels off. Scuppered for good. Poppy, good to see you again. Poppy Coburn with us here on Talk. More from you on the way. 0344 499 1000. Let's get the news at 7.
Talk. News. Update. On the hour. Headlines.
Secret plans are being drawn up by the government to cope with food shortages if the war in Iran continues. This fears the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. See a lack of carbon dioxide, which is critical to the food industry.
Across the UK on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your site. This is Talk. No nonsense news for the nation. This is Talk Breakfast.
And good morning. It's Ian Collins in for Jeremy Carr right here on Talk Breakfast. You clock that in the news. 1 in 5 teenagers in the UK do not share their political views for fear of being cancelled. What kind of mad upside-down Alice in Wonderland Hall of Mirrors world are we living in when a teenager can't have a view because they might be cancelled? Or if I say it and somebody puts it on the socials, I won't get a job because every applicant for a job gets Googled these days. I said something that maybe not even that contentious. It only needs to be disagreeable to one person to cause an issue, it seems. There is a bit of a theme here this morning when it comes to law and order. As we discuss in quite a lot of detail in the first hour, we've got so much response on this and we'll continue to take your calls. Protesters have demanded that police release descriptions and CCTV footage Of the men suspected of a gang rape in Epsom, this is a woman who was raped outside a church last Saturday. So here we are on Thursday, still got no description. Police are investigating after several men attacked the woman early hours. Despite there being 6 trillion CCTV cameras, they failed to release any kind of description on this. Now, just to make this even more curious, protesters demanding information. You know, we need to know. This is on our doorstep. It's on our patch. We have rapists among us. We'd like some detail, please. Protesters went out into the streets and they were met with riot police. I'm not kidding you. Dozens of riot police in the full riot gear on the high street, which was an extraordinary response, a response we didn't see when hundreds of feral teenagers were looting shops in South London just a couple of weeks ago. It's a curious position in terms of law and order. Should we know the identity and ethnicity of a suspect straight away? You can voice notice there as well, 0344 499 1000. Shoplifting, there's been a 133% rise in just 5 years. Paedophiles who view indecent images of kids are not being arrested because some police forces are too busy. Too busy doing what? Too busy, well, maybe protesting or policing the protesters. Meanwhile, and perhaps in many ways it connects a lot of this, MPs have voted against, second time, a proposed ban on social media for under 16s. Social media, of course, that will dish out all manner of nefarious things like a healthy dose of shoplifting videos, for example, sexual content, and the kind of violence that Tarantino couldn't dream up. But, hey, the kids love it. Thoughts on that? But you've got to be careful with that one. Thin end of a wedge. You know, where do you go with this? What else cannot be shown? When the government say you can't show this or publish that, from a journalistic perspective, we should be worried. Oh, and a new academic study is to compile a list of regional swear words and insults because they differ from place to place. In the southeast, the word pranit apparently is quite big. Now, I live in the south. I've never heard pranit. I remember pranny when I was younger. I do hope, Ofcom fans, that that is a legit word and doesn't mean something so horrific that you will never hear from me again in the next 10 minutes. Pranit in the southeast, a Raj Bampot in parts of Scotland, but curiously not all of Scotland, a Mazzoline in the Midlands. What is your favourite word or insulting phrase? You can voice note us on that as well. Don't worry if it's a bit salty, that's okay, because we have a bleep that we can bleep out the bad bits. We've got a thing called a profanitator that takes out naughtiness. Also, a little bit of breaking news as well. The UK economy grew by 0.5% in February. This is according to the Office of National Statistics. These figures always come out at 7 o'clock, just after on the dot. It's a small scintilla of growth, 0.5% in February. What do we make of that? James Price, former government special advisor, is with us. James, good morning to you. Nice to see you. Just give us an overview here. When you're on the inside of government, awaiting figures like the one we've just got, 0.5%. I mean, I guess any chancellor would go, I'll take it. It's, you know, it's got the word grew rather than went downwards. Shrunk was the other word I was looking for. Would that be significant to a government, 0.5%?
I mean, if it is, it's an even more damning indictment than we'll spend the rest of the morning already slamming this government for, or any other government.
Yeah.
It seems that, that every government talks about wanting economic growth and then they go about doing the exact opposite. I think it's really, really, really important that we try and get people to understand that economic growth is the only thing that is going to help fix a huge amount of the problems that we face as a country. And I think that we have been shielded, frankly, from the worst impact of a lack of economic growth for far too long. Governments of all colours, including the Conservatives, borrowed huge amounts of money, and you think, well, surely that will come back to bite us at some point, and it will do. It will bite us in the form of our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren having to pay back our debts. There's nothing moral or decent about that. Rachel Reeves herself at least said there's nothing good about enriching the kind of institutions and banks and things that lend governments money. And therefore, you know, she tried to get her backbenchers to talk about the idea of vague fiscal responsibility. And of course, Labour don't like that. They like spending other people's money. It's very easy to be generous when you're spending other people's money. But 0.5% growth This is terrible, right? I know this has just come out, but this is really not acceptably as a number. You look at the level of growth that the United States is enjoying, and you look at the amount of growth that we've got here. Think about the increase in our population as well, because of a high level of immigration. When you divide those two numbers together, the growth is even lower, because what really, really matters is not just the overall size of the economy, which can grow when you have a lot of people joining the country. You want to start about per capita growth, so how much the economy is growing per person. And not very long ago that Britain was one of the richest countries in the world per capita, and we've been falling down that ranking as economic growth has gone down and the level of low-skilled immigration from all over the place has gone up. I'm sorry to be such a Debbie Downer first thing talking to you, but this is just not acceptable. And last thing I'll say, Nick, when you don't have economic growth, that's when politics does get mean and nasty, because it does become a zero-sum game. It means that I either have to choose schools or hospitals. Defence or welfare or things like that. When you've got lots of economic growth, a rising tide lifts all ships, and it's not a zero-sum thing, and the socialists are wrong. But when you've got no growth, the socialists are kind of right in that, you will have to start taking money from one person to give to another. And that makes us mean and nasty. It means the rich people will leave the country, there's less for the rest of us, and what happens then? Taxes go up even more.
Indeed, and they love a tax rise, does this government. But of course, he talks about, we played the clip yesterday, growth was central to everything. Growth, 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 growth. It was all Keir Starmer was banging on about, I'll bring you growth. It's my central idea. It's number one on the to-do list. I've got it all mapped out, growth. We haven't seen any. He's been there nearly 2 years now.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, they talk about this. None of the Labour cabinet understand any of this. I think with the exception of Rachel Reeves, I don't think anyone in that cabinet has ever actually had a job in a profit-making organisation before. And Reeves, of course, as we will remember, fibbed about the amount of experience that she's got because she lied on her CV about it. She at least knows more than some of the rest of these people. But they genuinely don't actually understand. And when they're told these are the sorts of policies that you can do in order to get growth, they don't want them, because they don't like the idea that someone might complain about some infrastructure being built. They don't like the idea that one of their trade unions, paymasters, might kick off about it. And I think something really important on this, I was reading a book recently from the 1970s, very clever guy, William Waldegrave, you might remember when those sort of Thatcher governments, very clever guy. And I was really struck reading this book that he said, it's really puzzling that we just don't seem to have a proper clue about how you get economic growth, because you remember the kind of post-war consensus, how difficult everything was before Thatcherism came along and boosted everything. We don't have that problem anymore. We know what works. In fact, we've known for hundreds of years since Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations that if your taxes aren't too high and you give people a bit of economic freedom and let them get on with things, let them innovate things, let them become more productive, then great things happen. So we know how to fix this stuff, and the fact that successive governments, Tories, yes, but definitely Labour, don't do this shows they just don't care about you, and they're happy with you being poor because you're easier to control through the state.
James, let's move to this story. This has been dominating our phone lines this morning. Police investigating the rape in Epsom at the weekend, a horrific crime, a gang rape of a young girl who'd come out of a nightclub. It happened last Saturday. Outside a church, which rather sort of compounds the horror of this. We've heard nothing since then. We're just shy of a week away from when this happened. The police have released no details about the identity or who they're looking for, despite the fact that that part of Epsom has about 6 trillion CCTV cameras all over the place. I think you can reasonably argue that you might want that information. If there are rapists out there, people would need to know, is it that group? Is it a 6'8" ginger guy with a long beard? With that kind of information. See Crime Watch for details. These shows were predicated on descriptions, identities. Think of the old wanted posters back in the day. It's not a new request to want to know who the police might be looking for. Apparently, 5 days on, they're unable to produce anything. This, of course, has naturally provoked some disquiet. Many people went out onto the streets yesterday and said, look, can we have some information, please? And the police didn't give them information. What they did do instead was send 50 Riot squad officers to the scene.
I think this is absolutely disgraceful. I mean, first of all, It's such an awful story. The fact that it happened outside a church, as you say. And I've got my uncle and auntie live in Epsom, right? It's a lovely place. I think it was ranked the 12th most desirable place to live in Britain or something like that. And then the fact that something like this happens shows that the kinds of horrors that we are sadly getting inured from and used to hearing about happening in London and other big cities is spreading out to the suburbs, spreading out to the countryside soon, wherever you are listening or watching this program. It's these sorts of events seem to be more frequent and happening more and more. The fact that they haven't released anything might be because the poor victim isn't able to get it across or anything like that. But I think that the police and the authorities more broadly lose the benefit of the doubt on that front because they've been so reticent to share this kind of information for so long. Yep. And it's taken, I think, Neil O'Brien, the Conservative MP, pushing and others to get various things like ethnicity to be released in crime statistics. Remember, of course, with Axel Ruda Cabana in Southport, he was described for a long time as a Welsh choir boy. And it turns out that it's probably not the most accurate description of that disgusting monster. Yeah. And the thing that really, really scares me, and on the screen you can see those riot police right now, is that unlike a lot of other protests that we've seen, the kind of disgusting anti-Jew hating Hamas marches and the like that we've seen in London for years now, since the October the 7th attacks, that have been very, very lightly policed, and people have been allowed to get away with screaming to kill the Jews and all that kind of horrible stuff. And one fairly peaceful seeming to me protest of people just wanting to know what's happened in their community and being given some information so they can keep themselves and their families safe, the state has decided to come down on those people like an absolute ton of bricks. Why is that? I think the reason, this is really, really important. Yeah. They know that, like happened with after Southport, that there were fears that things could really kick off and get very febrile, like in Epping Forest as well with Hadish Kabatu, and like happening now. This could cause a chain reaction of rioting and terror right across the country, because we've seen incidents like this happening all over the place. We know in many cases it is from people who've come over illegally in small boats of fighting-age men about whom we know nothing, and so on. And that's why they police it so heavily, because the state is terrified. And for the same reason, they don't police those Hamas marches properly, because they are also scared that if they did that, then things would kick off with a different group of people living in this country. Two-tier policing at its most egregious.
And what's interesting is that there have been cases before, and, I'm very, very pro-police. I think most people who've listened to me for any length of time will know that. But, and so this isn't usually the individual copper or detectives, PC or detectives' fault. These things come from higher up. But what is interesting is when we've seen situations where you think, where were the riot police? We're often told, well, you can't just magic up a load of riot gear. Right. They're not in every police station, but apparently the police in Epsom were able to conjure up quite a lot of riot. I know it's the Met. Well, no, it wouldn't come under the Met, would it? We can't under it's Surrey Police. So, okay, the Met are next door, put it that way. So they might be able to get their hands on it. But even so, it did seem like a rather extraordinary show of force. I'm going to bring you this, though, James. Mark Kelly has got in touch with us, who says, Ian, I'm a detective, and I wanted to add something reference this Epsom rape and the idea that the police are hiding the identities of offenders. I can totally understand this reaction after the Southport murders, but there's also times when there's a good reason for not giving out a description. I'm not involved in this case, but it could be that the victim did not see the attackers. It could have been dark. Something could have been put over the victim's head to stop her from seeing. It could be that they'd knocked her unconscious, so didn't see them. It could be that she's confused about things and giving different descriptions. So whilst I get there is suspicion, there's also plenty of good reasons why they wouldn't be able to give a description yet, says Mark in Yorkshire. And that's a completely reasonable response. I get that. I think perhaps in those circumstances, taking into account Mark and he's an experienced officer, he's a detective and knows his way around a crime scene, I would completely understand that. There must be a middle ground in that case where the police could even announce something of that nature. Because I cannot, people often say, James, why do we want the description? Why do we want to know? Are we therefore going to go, if we can see a picture of them or a description of them, then we can get even more angry because they might not look who we want them to look like. So there are caveats to releasing details of a suspect, but the police did say after Southport, we'll try and make it a priority that we do tell you information about who we're looking for.
Yeah, I think I was very careful in my last answer to say that exactly like this. In certain cases, there may be perfectly good reasons, but I do think the powers that be lose the benefit of the doubt when it seems to happen so frequently, with Southport being one classic example. I think your allusion earlier on to wanted posters is an interesting one, and I think that back in the day people would go, oh, hang on a minute, that person might look a bit like that person, I will make sure to lock my doors and give a wide berth to that person, or the rest of it. People won't remember the Hadesh Kabatu manhunt where the guy was accidentally released from custody.
Yes,
and
there's
there's CCTV of him just kind of going on a day trip wandering around London, and actually he did try and hand himself back in again, and the system was so incompetent that they weren't able to get him for a long time. Indeed. But let's be honest, that the reason that people want the information to be released, and the reason that it often isn't released by police, is because this stuff disproportionately is being committed by people who have arrived in very recent times, and those people tend obviously to be non-white ethnically, and the problem therefore of not releasing this does make it, I think, cohesion of ethnicity in this country even more difficult. If you're someone who is not white, but you've lived in this country all your life, your parents, your grandparents have, and suddenly people with whom you've rubbed shoulders with perfectly happily all your life suddenly start looking at you and thinking, oh, hang on a minute, maybe that guy's only just arrived, or the rest of it. It's a horrible situation in which to be, which is why it's even more important that we stop the boats coming over, that we stop these awful people coming in, committing all these crimes and all the rest of it. And by the way, that we stop banging on in every other walk of life about race and ethnicity, and we try and highlight that which unites us and makes us more similar than what's been happening with the sort of woke stuff for so long, of trying to highlight all of the differences. Because I think we know from academic literature that societies that are multi-ethnic have problems unless they elevate a kind of civic nationalism and show what unites us and combines us. Singapore's a great example of this. They've got Malay, they've got Han Chinese, they've got Indians, and if left to their own devices, those groups tended to, for example, acquit their own race in jury trials. And so Lee Kuan Yew, and he founded the modern state of Singapore, found he had to abolish jury trials and to get rid of that, to create a civic identity and stop going on about race, which is something I think we've got to learn to do here in Britain as well.
Indeed. Just a final point. What was the William Watergrave book you were reading? He's a man always worth listening to. Can you remember the title?
I've got it here. It is, in fact, it's called The Binding of Leviathan. Look at that.
There you go.
Look at
I knew it.
Great 70s Barnett as well. Look at that.
I literally bought, the reason I asked you, I bought that book I just checked it out while we were talking. 7th of March 2015, I got that book. And it's, if you love a bit of politics, well, it's a bit more than a bit of politics, of course, but if you enjoy that, and he was a much underrated politician, I sense, and a very calm and soothing man too. Listen, great to have you with us, James. Thank you, James Price, former government special advisor, with us on the programme. Thank you to him. Let's get a call from Epsom. This is Daniel. This is your patch, Daniel. What are you making of this? Good morning.
Ian, hi. Good morning. So, I mean, I've been ringing you for a long time, and I think I went to the protest last night in Epsom, and there was a lot of people out on the streets, and this particular rape is so awful. So, I mean, the girl was raped several times, spanning across one night. I mean, it's unbelievable, really, that it's happened here. Yeah. And I think last night in Epsom, there was a sense of shock amongst the people.
Sure.
So it wasn't so much. I mean, obviously they're angry, and a lot of the locals and a lot of the people that were out were angry because in this particular crime, it's really obvious that the descriptions of the attackers has not been put out. Okay. And that we all know what that usually is a signifier of. Now, when you look at people like me, I moved out of London because I didn't want to live there. I didn't want my children growing up there. And I bought a nice house and I got out of London because I wanted to give my kids a chance. I wanted them to have the kind of nice upbringing that I had, right? And I didn't want to expose them to the awful side, and that's why a lot of people move here, to be fair. And And a bit like where you are down in sort of Sevenoaks as well. People move out to these places to raise a family.
Yeah, that's absolutely bang on. You were, I know you were born and raised in London, Daniel. It ain't what it used to be and all that, because you've mentioned that previously, and I completely get that. And when you start to see similar problems encroaching on the area that you kind of escaped to, for want of a better phrase, it is disturbing. Do you think in this case, though, Dan, I mean, we did have, I don't know if you heard me read it out, a message from a serving detective who said there could be many reasons why they don't give a description. I mean, not least that the victim possibly didn't even see who attacked them. The victim could have been unconscious. The victim could have been hooded in some kind of way. There could be other reasons for it.
Yeah, there could be other reasons for it. But if I just use evidential, looking at previous cases from the past, whilst there could be other reasons,
but we never used to have this, Dan. We never used to have this. I mean, this is like, is it fairly recent? I always thought that up until a few years ago, they would say, yeah, we're looking for a white guy or a black guy or a brown guy. They would just tell you who they're looking for.
I just think what the shock is about, and I think what the reason that locals are scared is because this was a problem, this kind of mass immigration or illegal immigration destroying the fabric of society and ruining our country. People moved out of London because they wanted to get away from that, right? They wanted to get away from, you know, all of those issues, and now it's here. You can spend £750,000 on a house and it's here. It's affecting your kids. It's ruining your lives. And this illegal immigration and mass immigration from the third world is destroying the fabric of our country. You can see it, basically, the decline and degradation everywhere. And you can't get away from it anymore. You can't just pay to live in a nicer house in a nicer area. It's everywhere. And I think that you know, I think that the girl's family should take the government to court. And I think this government has reneged on their first duty of any government to protect They've reneged on it. They will not protect our borders, and they will not protect British citizens. And I think it's time that someone did something big, or the king got involved, because it's disgusting how this country is going.
Well, we are in, we're certainly not in a particularly comfortable place, to put it mildly. Daniel, always passionate stuff from Daniel in Epsom. Thank you to him. 0344 499 1000. Back with more from you in just a couple of moments. We're going to move to some other subjects as well. Let's first get a voice note, though. On that social media ban, the government voted yesterday, Parliament MPs voted yesterday to not ban social media for under 16s. Morning, Wayne.
Good morning, Ian. So children and social media, we can't legislate for it. We're too old. You know, the people in charge of legislation don't understand it. It's basically like blockbuster MPs and legislators trying to tell a youthful, young, enthusiastic Netflix designer how to run their business. Well, we have experience of that. They tried and it failed dramatically, it was as the famous story goes. So we need the young who have always had this technology and these apps and social media in their life to almost self-regulate themselves. They need to be in charge on what they want to happen, what they think should happen. Because once you get the old people involved who don't understand it, that's when you have the disconnect. That's when you have the overreaction. Let's leave it to the young'uns. They can decide their own fate on this, I'm afraid.
Waking up the nation. This is Talk Breakfast on Talk. conflict breaks out anywhere in the world, it has consequences here at home.
Slow down Merseyside, entering into the Willows,
national security briefing. From the conflict in Ukraine to the tensions in Gaza and the latest escalation with Iran, this is where you'll find comprehensive comments and expert analysis with multiple updates throughout the day. The Talk More podcast from Talk, available on the Talk app or wherever you get your podcasts.
An interchange and striking through Upper Edmonton on the North Circular following a breakdown, which is now clear at the 4th Street Tunnel.
UK Attitude on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good morning. Yes, welcome back. The home of common sense. Lots to get through in this section. 0344 499 1000. And, of course, comments from you on the way. Now, let's go to work with Baroness Pauline Neville-Jones, former UK Security Minister, former chair of the Joint Intelligence Committee. Pauline, good morning to you. Nice to have you with us.
Good morning.
Just a more general, kind of wider sense on the kind of curious world we live in at the moment. We've got wars going on and all sorts of issues around safety and security. When you were in office, would you say the world today is a safer or a less safe place than it was when you were serving in government?
Good deal less safe, sadly.
Yeah.
I mean, good deal less safe and getting less safe by the day. I mean, it's not as if we have, much prospect at the moment. I think of the level of uncertainty and of anxiety, likely to start improving.
Indeed.
I am very. I mean, this takes us back, the sort of atmosphere we have now to the sort of fear about the future that those of us who lived through the Cold War experience from time to time, and it's it's very bad news.
I remember being at school and the teacher saying to us, you're very lucky to be alive at this age at this time because you're the first generation that's never really known war in any meaningful way. And I thought, I felt quite proud of that. I went home and told my mum, wow, because she would have had an experience, the legacy of war, etc. Now, of course, it couldn't be more different because there's wars all over the place, for goodness sake. They're everywhere, it seems. And, of course, because of the nature of the world we live in, the kind of global nature, it's no longer isolated. What happens in one part of the world for a whole variety of reasons has very almost instantaneous knock-on effects.
Well, I think that's one of the sources of anxiety, which is that we have very little, feel at the moment for where there could be trouble next. Yeah. And we have seen in rapid succession, have we not? I mean, Ukraine, and now an absolutely major conflict in another part of the world, which was largely unexpected. There was no particular reason to suppose that we would have a major explosion in the Middle East.
Yeah.
We knew there was tension. And indeed, there was a contained war going on with involving Israel. But the one that has now occurred with Iran has much, much bigger implications potentially and can bring in a great conflict if we're not extremely careful.
Well, indeed. I mean, the word security covers a number of bases, of course. And, we talk about food security and shortages and things like that. I mean, these are tangible, very real, being felt at this moment, knock-on effects.
So those who are not actually implicated in the fighting, nevertheless are going to feel the consequences of it.
Yeah.
And they include first and foremost, I think, economic consequences, both the price obviously of energy, the things that go with that, like fertilizer for our fields, and indeed trade in normal goods, including food.
Yeah.
So we have the prospect of quite a lot of complications down the line.
Indeed.
Of maintaining normal life.
I suppose on the plus side, from the government's point of view, they've made an extra £215 million from drivers on the forecourt.
Well, yes.
That would be seen as some sort of Rachel Reeves victory, maybe.
Yeah, if we were to actually start exploiting our own oil and gas again, though that would not decrease the price, at least we would get some of the revenue. And it does seem to me that this is a quite sufficient emergency for us to need to do that. And we wait, I think, government to change its mind and get on and allow us to have the oil and the gas that is under our own land and under our own sea.
Do you see, just a final point, Baroness, do you see a moment in the future? Can you see it coming around the corner when we'll look back at this as almost as a bad dream? Ukraine was falling apart and Iran and the Middle East is a complete mess. There's basket case regimes all over the world. Can you see it panning out? Is there a natural order of events? Does your intellect tell you that actually these things do go in cycles and the sunny uplands, as Boris Johnson might have put it, are just around the corner?
Well, I think the good scenario is one where we open the Straits of Hormuz fairly soon, and that limits the damage. And we will find that over the months that we manage to cope with the various shortages, which I think are bound to arise, but they'll be limited. As things stand at the moment, there's no guarantee of that. Yeah. So the answer to your question is we don't know. We don't know, and we've got every reason at the moment to be worried about the potential for future bigger and other things that we haven't yet experienced. So I don't think we can, as things stand at the moment, offer ourselves reassurance about this being short-lived.
Yeah. Well, we will. I mean, I guess that's why God invented prayer, isn't it? Maybe that's what we're left with. Baroness Pauline Neville-Jones, thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Former UK Security Minister and former Chair of the Joint Intelligence Committee. Thank you to her. 0344 499 1000, 25 to 8. This is Talk.
The Ministry of Common Sense. This is Talk. Across the UK, on Talk, on DAB+, biggest stories, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, it is Talk, the home of common sense. Ian Collins in for Jeremy Carl. So much comment coming in. Joanna in Salisbury says, Ian, so they just happen to have police in riot gear, booted and suited, ready to go in Epsom. It tells you they do have the description of the rapist, and they will know there will be trouble. You kind of wonder, in the absence of, we did have that message from a serving detective who completely reasonably gave reasons why you might not release a description. And I do get that. But we're living in curious times. It's not like we haven't seen this play out before. So cynicism is quite a healthy disposition when it comes to situations such as this. Will we get anything later today? Don says the police don't have time to deal with crime because they're busy looking for prisoners who've been released by mistake. Yeah, 179 of them at the last count. 3 a week are getting released in error. 0344 499 1000. There have been some arrests in another case, though, however, a firebomb attack, an anti-Semitic firebomb attack on a London synagogue. This is a pretty grim story, but sadly, and it's awful that I should even be able to find these words, it doesn't surprise me. Let's speak with Stephen Silverman, Director of Investigations and Enforcement of the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. Does that overstate?
Warning very loudly in the final quarter of 2023 that the hate that we had seen unleashed on our streets, on our university campuses, in professions such as the NHS, that were just words at that time, would inevitably turn into action.
Yeah.
And they have. We've seen vandalism of Jewish businesses, we've seen intimidation of Jews, we've seen arson attacks, and we have seen the murder of Jews. This could have been prevented had these expressions of hatred towards a tiny minority in this country been dealt with in the same way as hate directed at any other minority in this country would have been dealt with.
I was just going to raise that. I mean, I'm kind of, as you can hear, I'm sort of lost for words. You know, I read the Badil book, Jews Don't Count, and it really, I mean, just the title of the book sort of tells you everything you need to know. I'm just struggling as to how we got to this stage, where, as you say, a very small minority in this country. There's not assimilation issues. There's not issues with a lack of commonality in any kind of way. In fact, it's all the very opposite to that. A productive community, if you want to look at it down those I mean, I could keep going on about the curious nature of this. How did we get to a stage where this not just happens with an alarming regularity, but it seems to sort of be given a tacit green light?
Well, I think one way to understand this is to look at the statement that the Prime Minister gave on Yom HaShoah. Yom HaShoah happened a couple of days ago, and it's the day on which the Jewish community remembers the dead, the victims of the Holocaust. He again repeated his determination to stamp out anti-Semitism, and he cited his banning of Kanye West from entering the country to appear at the Wireless Festival as an example of that. Well, that's very interesting, because he showed in that case a determination to act vigorously in the case of anti-Semitism when it was the anti-Semitism of the extreme right, Nazi ideology. And we've seen this before. We saw it in Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party when they were all too quick to call out far-right anti-Semitism, but were completely incapable of seeing, recognising or naming the anti-Semitism that existed in their own ranks.
Yeah.
And we have that today. We have a complete inability of the radical left to identify the fact that there is anti-Semitism among people who have labelled themselves as the good guys, the anti-racists. And of course, we now have the toxic alliance with Islamist extremists who hate the Israeli state, and of course who hate, by extension, Jews for different reasons. So that's why we are here. An unwillingness to call out anti-Semitism, racism within the ranks of the people who have labelled themselves the good guys, and an unwillingness to alienate, for some reason, the Islamist extremists that exist in this country.
It seems to go right to the top. Is our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, failing Jews of this country?
Not just the Prime Minister, all of the institutions of state are failing the Jewish community. The professional regulators who fail to take action against members who articulate the most horrendous anti-Semitic statements imaginable. The police who stand by and watch as calls for extermination are heard on our streets. The Crown Prosecution Service whose prosecution rate of anti-Semitic hate crime has been shown to be pathetically low. And of course, the government that has the ability, and not just this government, previous governments as well, but this government has lived through the worst of what we've experienced over the last 2.5 years. Their failure to get a grip of this and back up their rhetoric with firm action has massively failed the Jewish community. It's hard not to find an organization or an institution that isn't complicit in this.
I mean, this is a troubling assessment that you're giving us on this, Stephen. But again, as I said at the beginning, no real surprise. We have an Islamist problem in this country. People will say, well, that overstates it. I don't believe it does overstate it. We're playing Russian roulette on a daily basis with people who come to the country. I mean, isn't it extraordinary, by the way? I mean, just it's worth mentioning this in this context, that we have people arriving by boat across the channel in their hundreds on a weekly basis, particularly when the weather is good. Iranians make up part of the 70% bulk number of that group. Now, the last time I looked, there's a war going on in Iran. Islamists, the greatest sponsors of state terrorism, who want to eradicate Israel, amongst other things, is within the equation somewhat of this. And yet unidentified people coming from that country can jump on a boat and arrive and be accommodated within hours. Now, I'm not suggesting every Iranian young man is capable or even would think about that, but for security services not to say, look, we've got an anti-Semitism problem and we're importing into this country people from the very country that is responsible for wanting to destroy Israel. Somebody should be joining those dots. I don't think there's hyperbole on what I'm saying there, Stephen. What do you think?
No, there's 2 points that I'll make. First, we mustn't forget that a large number of those Iranians are in fact Iranian dissidents who are basically on our side.
Correct.
But also, we also know that there is a significant presence of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps here, who our counter-terrorism services are having to work overtime in order to foil their plots. But this is the important thing to realize, and this goes to what you've just said. Anti-Semitism here is not the disease. It is the first symptom of the disease, because this is an attack initially on Jews, but on Western values.
Correct.
On the liberal democratic values that all of us value, that keep us safe. And there appears to be no real will, despite regular statements by people from the security services, by Jonathan Hall, KC, who is the lead advisor on terrorism in this country. There seems to be no real desire to stand up, draw a line in the sand and say, no, you are not stepping over this line. It's just not happening.
Indeed. It is a troubling time we are living in. I hope your community stays safe, Stephen, and thank you for speaking with us. The more we can talk about this stuff, one hopes that it does perhaps begin to take us forward to some sort of reasoned response and resolution to everything. Stephen, thank you. Stephen Silverman, Director of Investigations and Enforcement of the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. Thank you to him. Over to you, 0344 499 1000. So many issues to talk about here. This comes from Chris in Hornchurch with the Epsom rape case. If the rapist was white, the police would be singing from the rooftops. Look at how the police tried to make the murderer who murdered those girls in Southport look like a Welsh child. We're in that territory. That's exactly where this puts us. Of course, you could be non-white but British. That would be the contention perhaps the police are holding on to. Well, the police claim, they literally said in their press release, we don't have, we literally don't, it's not like we've got it but we can't release it. We don't have adequate descriptions. It has been countered by some saying, well, there could be many reasons why the police don't release details. Sometimes they literally don't have it. But one can reasonably say, I mean, we live in a world where we don't trust our institutions. Why would we trust our institutions? Look at the amount of lying that has happened from government. Look at the amount of cover-ups. I just mentioned there to Stephen, talking about anti-Semitism. which does get largely a bit of a free pass in this country. I'm not saying if you firebomb cars and synagogues, yes, you will be nicked and go to jail. But there's a lot of other stuff that doesn't really get taken seriously in the same way. I just alluded to the fact that when those Channel boats come over, on those boats could well be those from the Iranian Guard who wish to do us harm, all right? Now, I can say that with confidence because we don't know who is on those boats. We do know some of those people come from Iran. At one point, they made up the bulk of those crossings. Now, when I say that, an itchy lefty will be thinking, you can't say that, mate. You can't say that. Really? You can't say that. If I'd said something about Jews, I don't think that same lefty would have even considered that to be an issue. But the minute I just allude to the very real possibility that we're importing terrorism to this country, certainly the ideology of terrorism, people lose their minds over that. Oh, we better not release information about someone in case people start to join some dots that we don't want joining. You don't hear real condemnation. I'm going to say what I said at the beginning of the week, fire in the pit of the belly of the Home Secretary. We don't hear that kind of stuff. If you raise issues in certain areas, it's so sensitive, nobody wants to talk about it. I'm an intelligent bloke. I don't think every person that comes out of Iran or Iraq or any of those countries is going to be a terrorist. I'm pretty sure most are completely reasonable, law-abiding people, some quite religious and law-abiding. But there will be extremists among them. We know that for a fact. We've seen the cultural clashes for a fact. But if you so much as put your head above the parapet, boy, you could be in for a public lashing. The minute you say, oh, we know what you think, Colin, yeah, we get all of that kind of caper. Anti-Semitism, not quite the same thing. Not quite the same thing. It's gone on for ages. 0344 499 1000. Calls on that. Calls on the Epsom story. Calls on social media. Calls on shoplifting. Calls on paedophiles not getting arrested. Man alive, we're falling apart here. Let's get a voice note. This comes from Mike in Epsom. Morning to you, Mike.
Hi, Ian. Mike and Whitney here. I noticed all the police that were there in Epsom. You can't get that amount of police for anything, can you? Except something like this. I would be totally embarrassed, and if I was a policeman, and I wouldn't want my family to know that I was one of those coppers stood in that street. It's just a disgrace. Where this country's going, God knows. But good people are leaving, as you know, and good people like me, I'm 72, if I had the money, I'd be leaving. Good people leaving, bad people arriving. What a state we're in. Thank you. Great show as always.
Is facing its gravest test in decades, and the royalty from Talk is your front row seat. With royal reputations under pressure and probing questions about public trust, we unpack every twist and revelation with the biggest names in the business. From the throne room.
Slip at junction 12 and slow as well on the A14 eastbound heading towards Cambridge. An accident closing lane just prior to junction 25 at Bar Hill, and it's slow clockwise on the M25 in Kent. A breakdown closing lane 1 between the M26 at junction 5 for Sevenoaks and Clackett Lane services.
See it, hear it, talk it. Your national disputation verification station. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Yeah, good morning. 5 to 8. It's Ian Collins standing in for Jeremy Carl for the rest of this week and next week. Jeremy is back after that. We do look, by the way, for like nice headlines. We do something. It'd be interesting to come into work one day and I could sit there with Christian, our producer, and go, do you know what, isn't it great? Everything's fabulous out there. Look, the military are running tickety-boo. No crime today. Nobody jumped on a rubber boat and tried to get into the country across the channel. There's no shoplifting. There's no people with iffy content on their phone. Isn't it fantastic? And we're not in that place, sadly. And earlier this week, we touched on this yesterday, Lord Robertson tearing into Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, that extraordinary intervention on defence spending. And that stayed with me, those comments, when he said we are not safe, literally described it as we are not safe. And this is a fellow that doesn't really put his head above the parapet too often. A very informed man, former Defence Secretary of this country, but former head of NATO. That's a big gig. Let's get a word from Sir Simon Mail, retired British Army General. Sir Simon, good morning to you.
Hi, Ian. Good morning.
Morning. Nice to have you with us. I mean, it was interesting, wasn't it, when Lord Robertson spoke? I mean, he didn't have to do that. He clearly feels very, very passionately that there is a problem. And it's not he wasn't really talking about, an ideal tick list of what would be great in the ideal army. He was talking about us being in a perilous state. I'm slightly paraphrasing, but he certainly did say we're no longer safe.
Yeah. Well, I know George Robertson. He's a really fine politician, fine man. He ran one of the best defence reviews back in 1977 for Tony Blair. He obviously conducted with an old chum of mine, Richard Barron's, a inverted commas strategic defence review for the current Prime Minister. He's an old-fashioned Labour loyalist. He's also a very, very patriotic, Brit. For him to come out, you'd expect this sort of thing. I say this sort of thing, it's absolutely right, but from a Tory politician. But when you hear it from somebody like George Robertson, who's been Secretary General of NATO, you really understand that he is seriously, seriously worried about the state of the nation's defences.
Yeah, indeed.
And he has every right to be, and we have every right to take his warning really seriously.
Absolutely spot on. And as you rightly say, I mean, this is a man who is a Labour man. He's a Labour politician. He's very loyal to the cause. He sings from that particular hymn sheet politically. So for him to say all of this is deeply disturbing. And as I said before, he's not a man that looks for the spotlight or the microphone ordinarily. On most days of the week, he's very dignified and sticks to what he does. So for him to say
the man
this
of a certain age, Ian, he doesn't need this sort of hassle, as it were, put his head above the parapet. He is a deeply concerned, patriotic British politician. And this defence, as we say, we can all play political football with it, but it really is a national responsibility and it is being neglected.
A word, Simon, if we could, on the Strait of Hormuz, Donald Trump, China. I can't work this thing out. I know trying to follow Donald Trump is not the easiest thing in the world, even on a good day. So there was some evidence that China were certainly endorsing, supplying or endorsing what was going on in Iran. But this would very much go against the idea that Donald Trump is friends with President Xi. That doesn't sound about right. You wouldn't be mates with someone who's supplying your enemy or even endorsing them at whatever level. He wrote him a letter and said, I hope you're not doing that. And he wrote back and said, no, I'm not. So that's all cleared up then. Not Simon. What do you make of that? Firstly,
the Straits of Hormuz will be reopened. There's no doubt about it. It depends on what terms it is. China is huge. I've always said this. China is hugely important in this equation because so much of what is coming out of the Strait of Hormuz goes east to China. It is not in China's interest. It's hitting it's claiming it's hitting its economic target growth. It's got its own problems internally, etc. So it needs oil and gas. They are very, very influential in Tehran, without doubt. So they will be supplying Tehran, supporting Tehran, but making it very clear to Tehran, we need to get this straight open. It'll come at a cost, though. The last thing Donald Trump really needs just before he goes to Beijing and sees Xi is to be dependent on the goodwill of the Chinese to give him an off-ramp from a war he started. And I certainly hold absolutely no torch for the Iranians. They've been one of the most malign influences across the whole region, which I know well, for decades. So I am hoping that there's a lot of bluster from them, but they know they're in a weak position, and we will need probably Chinese support and pressure for this to come to a satisfactory conclusion without the war breaking out again.
Indeed. Do you sense that the Chinese have been overtly or tacitly endorsing the Iranian regime in this particular battle?
No, but I think they can see they are relishing the Americans being a bit embarrassed by the whole occasion. But it's not in their interest for it for the war to go on much longer or to expand. But at the same time, they can take a certain amount of pleasure or satisfaction in the fact that the Americans have expended an awful lot of weaponry, goodwill, reputation, etc., just prior to this summit.
Just a very final point. We were speaking in the last section to Pauline Neville-Jones, a name I'm sure you will be familiar with, former Security Minister. We were talking to Pauline about whether the world is a safer place today than it was years ago. Sounds like a silly question saying it out loud, doesn't it? But what a sad indictment of the 21st century that here we are in 2026 and we're less safe than we were 30 years ago. It was meant to be the other way round, Simon.
Well, Ian, you've tracked it. You're very vocal on bringing this to people's attention. But we really have squandered a moment in history from the fall of the Berlin Wall. We took the peace dividend. We totally understand that. But it's unbelievable for how long we have continued to pretend that the world is getting safer.
Yeah,
we're healthier, we're wealthier, etc. But by goodness, it all depends on security.
Spot on. Simon, wise words to finish on. Thank you, Sir Simon Mell, retired British Army General, with us here on Talk.
Talk. News. Update. On the hour. Headlines.
The business secretary says the government is drawing up plans for a range of scenarios, including food shortages this summer because of the war in Iran. The closure of a key shipping route could lead to a lack of carbon dioxide, which is critical to the food industry. Britain could see a reduction of chicken and pork. Breweries could also be hit because the gas is used to make drinks fizzing. Peter Kyle told us that planning shows a competent government.
When people read what is a leak, and it is difficult for me because, of course, these leaks are very unhelpful, but when people do read it, they need to be reassured that we are doing this kind of planning.
Police have warned disorder won't be tolerated after protesters gathered in Epsom after an alleged rape in the town. A woman in her 20s reported she'd been attacked outside a church on Saturday morning. Surrey Police says it doesn't have enough information to release descriptions of the suspects. Daniel lives in Epsom and was at the protest last night.
This particular rape is so awful. It's unbelievable, really, that it's happened here. And I think last night in Epsom, there was a sense of shock amongst the people.
Sir Keir Starmer's threatening stark consequences if social media companies don't step up their protections of children. As
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Speaking truth to the people, indeed. That tequila story at the end of the news there, we might have a little look at that in a bit. That's just extraordinary what happened. If you didn't catch it, I'll reiterate in a few moments' time. Spoiler, it involves tequila and stairs. That's all you need to know. Details to come. Busy morning on the programme. What are we looking at here? Police investigating after several men attacked a woman in Epsom in the early hours of Saturday morning. They haven't released any kind of description of the people they are looking for, which is quite extraordinary in a world of CCTV. They have absolutely nothing. And naturally, it's taken us back to Southport again, because we're scratching our heads saying, well, why would you not be at least giving us some info? There is a school of thought. It's possible they don't actually have any info, that the victim was unable to give any information. We will wait with bated breath to hear from Surrey Police. Shoplifting is up. Catching paedophiles who view indecent images is down. The police haven't got the time to attend these kind of crimes, but they did have the time to attend Epsom yesterday when people took to the streets because they were concerned about a member of their community being raped and thought, well, we need some information on this. There's a group of rapists among us. We need information. The police response was to send dozens of cops in riot gear. If you're looking at this in visuals, you can see it on the screen. I mean, this was the full riot gear. Riot gear, we're often told. But riot gear that certainly didn't appear when God knows how many feral teens were shoplifting and looting shops in Clapham just a couple of weeks ago. A confused world? You bet. Let's speak with Zia Youssef, Home Affairs spokesman for Reform UK. Zia, morning to you.
Good morning.
We'll come on to another aspect of what you guys are announcing today in just a moment. But let's just get a word on what is happening here in Epsom. I mean, this is distressing at every single level. In addition to the horrors of a young girl early in the morning on Saturday getting raped, the one thing you hope you will get from the police is some information about who they are looking for. We have none.
Yep, I mean, and I'm afraid this is something we have come to expect these days. And by the way, one of the reasons why people jump to conclusions to the degree that they do is that I think it's so often the case if the perpetrator of a serious crime's ethnicity is white or indeed white British, the police are very quick and forthcoming, are they not, to give that information. And I don't think it does any good. You can look at the arguments that were made by the government's own counter-terrorism czar when he was referring to terrorist incidents or attempted terrorist incidents, who said exactly the same thing, that withholding information from the public does far more harm than good. But I also want to say this, I understand why this is a serious concern, the fact that there seems to be this double standard and withholding of information with serious crimes, horrific crimes like this. I want to go back to the underlying point of the horrific crimes. I mean, for example, the fact that Reform has articulated a number of times that the statistics show that Afghan nationals in this country are 20 times more likely to be convicted of sex offences than British citizens. And whenever we've done that, we've been taken to task for it, even though it's demonstrably true. That's according to the government's own data. The reality is that what's happened is the previous Tory government embarked on a people smuggling program, if you remember, to import tens of thousands of Afghans, not only against the wishes of the British people, but in some cases without their knowledge. They took out a super injunction to stop anybody knowing about it. So that is a catastrophic decision that they made. It's a massive, massive betrayal. And we've got to focus on the thing that matters most, which is keeping British people safe, keeping British women and girls safe. And that's the lens through which all of these decisions must be made. And that's why Reform will leave the ECHR, reverse all of these insane programs that allow basically a legal industrial complex of lawyers to aid and abet what we would argue is an invasion in this country, given we're closing in on 200,000 people, most of the military-age men from countries like Iran, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, to turn up on our beaches and then get taxpayer money to stay here. So it is an absolute catastrophe. My heart goes out, obviously, to the victims. I can totally understand why people are so angry, but I want to bring people back to the core of this issue, which is there are far too many. There are north of 1 million illegal migrants in this country. They need to go. We need to prioritise British citizens and the safety of British people. We need to make sure that the instruments of state tasked with keeping British people safe do that and only that.
Just before we move on to the wider issue that Reform are looking at today, based on what has happened in Epsom, would you be urging, encouraging, calling for Surrey Police to release details of those that they are looking for?
Of course, of course. I mean, I can't understand what the counter argument to that be. I mean, just the idea that the police are saying we're looking for the suspect and give the public no information as to what the suspect looks like, I think is absolutely ridiculous. So of course I would call on the police to do that. And if we had a Reform government, frankly, it would not be up to the police to make such decisions anyway.
Would that include ethnicities here?
Of course it would. Of course it would. I mean, look, it is obviously true that knowing the ethnicity of somebody is going to help the public identify I mean, how often, you know, when people are wanted for really serious crimes, they are spotted by the public, who then call the police. How on earth, you know, ethnicity, whether we like it or not, we live in the real world.
Right.
Ethnicity is one of the most identifiable characteristics about a person, other than perhaps their gender.
And it's interesting, I mean, you know, wanted posters go back hundreds of years. It's not controversial to want to know who you're looking for. In fact, you know, you can reasonably say, well, look, if you live in Epsom, then I think particularly women and girls of Epsom might want to know who might be among them at the moment.
It's actually, but again, you know, it's a really important. We should call it out that there's the motivation behind this is because there are many people still, many of them sadly paid by the taxpayer, who are just worried about being called racist, and I'm afraid that has tragic consequences, because you'll remember during the Manchester Arena bombings, during the court hearings, there was a security guard from the MEN Arena who said that he saw the bomber wearing the backpack, he looked shifty, and he was going to move in and say something, but he decided against it because he was worried about being called racist. Now, how, you know, there's a very strong case to be made that perhaps those innocent people who lost their lives that day would still be alive today. So this is actually a very, very pernicious issue.
Indeed, and as we spoke yesterday or the day before, Zio, on Southport and Nottingham, you know, similar issues of sensitivity around racial sensitivity around those cases too. This story, which we talked about yesterday, curious, it was the BBC actually decided to do something about immigration, or at least write about it, and that was the extraordinary expose that realised that some law firms are charging, in order to help predominantly Pakistani, Bangladeshi, bogus asylum seekers fake their sexuality in order to get asylum applications approved. Now, we kind of all knew this was going on. It also happens with religion as well, somebody will say, or it will, there'll be some other concocted excuse. So this in itself isn't new, but I know Reform UK want to take action.
Absolutely. You know, anyone who's seen this documentary, as you said, on one hand, it's shocking. On the other hand, it's something people listening to this show will know has been going on for a long time, that there are lawyers in this country who have been deliberately coaching illegal migrants or people who've overstayed on visitor visas on how to defraud the British people and get to stay here when they shouldn't, on the basis of them being gay, and that being something that their supposed home country would take a dim view of, or pretending to be from a country from which they are not actually from. Now, this is fraud. I want to make a really important point. Has anyone been arrested from that documentary? Are you aware? Have you seen a statement from the police saying that they are actively investigating? Not a jot. Why is it? Because yes, there are laws here and laws there on the statute books, but they are weak source because they have a very high threshold for prosecution, because you have to prove intent, so they're very rarely prosecuted anyway. And also, here's the other really important point, that because of the ECHR and all of these other things, exactly the laws that these lawyers are using in the first place, it's actually very, very difficult to get those things done. So what Reform are going to do is two things. Number one, we're going to end legal aid for anyone who came here on a visitor visa and overstayed or broke into the country illegally. No more legal aid. And since 2018, Tory and Labour governments have spent over 135 million quid of British taxpayers' money on that. It's absolutely insane. The idea that someone should be able to break into this country and get British taxpayer funds to fight their removal is utterly, utterly ridiculous. Reform will end it. That's number one. Number two, we'll introduce a new criminal offence of aiding and abetting a fraudulent asylum claim in the UK. And we'll make that something called a strict liability offence, which is legalese. It means very simply, the prosecutor will not have to prove intent. It'll be like money laundering or anti-bribery financial crime laws that solicitors, law firms, etc., and accountants are already liable for. And what that will mean is we will put this, you know, this asylum, immigration, legal, industrial complex out of business for good.
It's interesting that with a documentary such as this, where we can see the people that were facilitating this, that, as you said, I mean, maybe later today we will see people arrested, but you wouldn't imagine that would take very long to knock on someone's door.
Listen, let's think about it the other way around. Let's say this was a documentary about supposed, you know, quote, far-right people saying things that, you know, the elites in this country would deem to be, you know, inappropriate. You can be sure as hell, certain as hell, that we would have heard about arrests having been made. This is a really, really serious crime, because ultimately, the people that they are coaching to commit fraud to stay here may well, forget about the economic cost and the cultural cost, they may well go on to commit sex offences, for example, against the British people. And we've also heard, here's the other point, the people who have been making these fraudulent claims and been granted asylum based on fraud, there's absolutely no evidence, actually, that they're going to be stripped of their settled status and deported. That's another thing that reform would do immediately. And actually, the Home Secretary already has the powers to do such a thing. I very much doubt that she's going to end up doing it. Let's see. But absolutely, these lawyers should have been arrested and the book thrown at them. We haven't heard a peep, and that's because we need much stronger and clearer laws in this country, and we need the law to actually be enforced.
Zia, thank you for your time. Always good to see you. Zia Youssef, Home Affairs spokesman for Reform UK. Thank you to him. Over to you. 0344 499 1000. We'll take some more comment from you shortly. We'll speak to Claire Coutinho in a second, Shadow Energy Secretary. Just a brief one here from Sue in Macclesfield. Ian, as a 65-year-old, I'm extremely worried and anxious about what is happening to our once great country, with our grandkids having no future, and the amount of horrific rapes, murders, and the total collapse of law. If I had the money, I'd take my entire family out of this hellhole. Isn't it sad that we are talking so regularly? I'll get half a dozen of the messages every single day saying something similar to the point that Sue just made. We shouldn't have to be thinking like that. I want to get out of this country. It's lawless, shoplifting, paedophilia, having the audacity to argue against a lack of information of a rape gang that are wanted, for goodness sake. All that, it all feeds in to the same horrendous, disturbing narrative of utter, almost criminal ineptitude by our government, our local authorities and our establishments. 0344 499 1000. That is where you'll find us. You can leave a voice note there as well. You can message us 87222. You're listening to Talk. Ian Collins sitting in the big seat for Jeremy Kyle for the next week or so. It's 8:15.
Current affairs, international news, letting criminals off while sending... Oi! Oi! You shut up! I'm trying to record something.
Stand by for 3 powerhouse hours of breaking news, challenging views. I don't give a flying damn about international law. I think people will viscerally reject this.
UK on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Morning, welcome back to the home of common sense. Jeremy Kyle is away for the rest of this week and next. It's Ian Collins here in the breakfast hot seat. There's so much to... I said hot seat, didn't I? There's so much to be getting on with here. The news keeps on coming. It's not all good news, sadly. We have disturbing news. It's right that at the home of common sense, there are very few places anywhere you will find on your dial that you can truly have a sounding board that will reflect the views, the opinions, the concerns of the average working man and woman of this country. And that is exactly what we do here on a daily. But you'll find little doppelgangers who try to give it a go, but they don't really. They're not really listening to you. The home of common sense we are, and this is one story that keeps coming back to us, and that is the safe spaces for women. Do you remember that Supreme Court judgment? It was quite clear, wasn't it? You know, yes, a woman is a woman, biological woman, and all the rest of it. Seems to have kind of gone out the window. Hardly anybody's taking notice for some reason. Interesting piece in the Mail this morning where the Shadow Energy Secretary and Shadow Minister for Equalities, Claire Coutinho, the MP, Conservative MP, has written, "What do we expect from a party whose leader can't define what a woman is?" Claire joins us now from College Green. Claire, good morning to you.
Good morning.
If you're ever bored, it's worth YouTubing a nice little montage of Labour MPs being asked that question to define a woman and watching them jump over themselves and twist themselves into all sorts of contorted knots, trying to answer what, as far as I can see, in fact, my 7-year-old knows what a woman is, a fairly easy to answer question. So if you're ever bored, grab yourself a glass of wine and sit back and enjoy those moments. But of course, you've seen it at close quarters as well in the House of Commons. And here we are a year on from that Supreme Court judgment, and it seems that this government still don't know what a woman is.
Well, look, I mean, I don't need to watch the video because, as you say, I've seen it in real life. And what we have seen is, I'm afraid, completely shambolic from this Labour government who pretends that they care about women's rights. There's been nothing more important than the Supreme Court ruling last year for women's rights in this country. And what have we seen in the following year? Absolutely nothing. And I'm afraid you've got lots of organisations out there at the moment who are not following the law. Yeah. What the Supreme Court set out was that biological sex is real. Women are women, men are men, and single-sex spaces must be protected. This is not a trivial thing. This is about women not having to get undressed in front of men. You know, this is women in vulnerable situations, whether that's a rape crisis centre or a women's prison, not, again, having to share those spaces with biological men. This is important. And yet, for a year, we have seen absolutely nothing from this Labour government. Just delay, obstruction, and I'm afraid it is a complete shambles, and it is time for this to end.
It's quite extraordinary, isn't it, that there are places I could go to right now. I mean, you know, I'm clearly a bloke. I've got a little bit of stubble. I've got some grey hair, quite a lot of grey hair, and I'm a man. But I could walk into some institutions and claim I want to use those toilets over there or those changing rooms because I identify as a woman. And there will be people who will say, yes, that's absolutely fine, Mr. Collins, away you go. I mean, what kind of messed up world are we living in, Claire?
Well, and those organisations who said that was fine, they'd be breaking the law, and that's what we've got to be clear. Everybody needs clarity. Everybody needs clarity here. And the cases that I've worked with a lot are actually nurses within the NHS who have stated that biological sex is real, whether that's for a medical need or for a changing room, so that they have not had to get changed into their scrubs in front of biological men. And those nurses have been hounded and harassed by the NHS. And, you know, I've had dealings with these trusts and the Nursing and Midwifery Council that was meant to protect these women that have fundamentally let them down. Fundamentally, they got the law wrong. These nurses got the law right. They got the law wrong. And nothing has happened. No one has been held accountable. There are probably still nurses in this country facing these political witch hunts under these sanctions, suspensions, whatever else it might be. And nobody in the government seems to care. It's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. While you're with us, Claire, as a member of the shadow government of this country, I'm bound to ask you a question that is certainly concerning our listeners. There was a horrific rape took place in Epsom at the weekend, a gang rape by all accounts. We have no information from the police. The public are concerned. It was 5 days ago. Surrey police sent out the Riot squad to police protesters who were concerned about their neighbourhood, their area. Nothing coming from the constabulary. Should Surrey police give us more information on this?
Well, look, it's hard for me to comment on live cases, but in general, I think what we have seen over the last few years is that it has gone much better for the police when they've been upfront about what has happened in particular cases, so that you don't have huge amounts of speculation online, because, you know, the country is worried. We have seen a huge amount of sexual attacks on women, and they are rightly concerned, and it's better if they can to head off speculation and be quite clear as soon as possible about what has happened.
I mean, it becomes a bit of an own goal, doesn't it, for the police in this respect, because the longer you don't give information, even if a senior officer stood in front of a microphone and said, look, I know this is a bit unconventional, we literally do not have any descriptions. The victim in this case was unable to supply us due to trauma, due to whatever disposition this poor woman was put through, is unable to supply us anything. We're trying to piece it together. We haven't got anything yet. Even that would help. But when there's a vacuum, people will always fill that vacuum, and then we end up with a bigger problem. And we saw what happened in Southport.
I was just going to say, I think that's exactly what we saw in Southport. And if I could just make a wider point, I think for too long we've had a situation where our authorities, and, you know, it's not all of their fault. There has been, whether it's legislation, political pressure, whatever it is behind it, you know, charity pressure as well. We shouldn't forget the NGOs. But there has been a situation where authorities have held back. They haven't, for example, put people who are clearly at risk of doing serious harm to the public in the position they need to be, whether that is being arrested, being put in a mental health unit, whatever it might be, because they are worried about being called racist. We saw that in the case of the Manchester bombing. We saw that in the case of the Nottingham killer. We saw that in the case of the Southport killer. Yep. And we have to get away from this. We have to get away from these cultural, made-up sensitivities which are stopping the authorities from protecting the public. Protecting the public and the public safety has to come first.
Absolutely spot on. Just very briefly, Claire, a very final point. Family tax bills to rise £4,000 under the financial genius that is Rachel Reeves. Your response to that, and can the Tories, if you got into power in 2029, can you reverse this and make us all a little bit richer?
Well, it's complete madness, and we've set out £47 billion of saving. No other party has done that, because you have to, if you want to cut taxes, cut public spending. And I'm afraid we are getting into a situation where people who are working, they are not well off. They're on £30,000, £40,000, £50,000 a year. They are struggling, and they are being hit by higher taxes. They are being hit by higher energy bills, thanks to Ed Miliband. And what is the government doing? The government is taking tax from them and giving it to people on benefits who are not working those hours. And I'm afraid what I get back from people when I talk to them at the moment is just a sense of, why do I bother? I'm trying to do everything right, and whether it's my, you know, cash savings, whether it's my pension, whether it's my income, the government is coming for me with all of these extra taxes when I'm the one who is working all hours, trying to feed my family, trying to do the right thing. And I should say that's why we've got a cheap power plan that would cut the cost of energy bills and electricity bills for everyone, all businesses. No other party has a plan for small businesses. We do. We could cut their electricity bills by 20% tomorrow. We've got a plan for households too. We could take, for the average household, £200 off their bills, because we have to help these people, these middle earners who are struggling as well. There is no focus on them, and as you say, all they are facing is more and more tax rises.
Claire, on that point, thank you for being with us this morning. Claire Coutinho, she is Shadow Energy Secretary, Shadow Minister for Equalities. Your response to what you've heard Claire say this morning, 0344 499 1000. You can drop us a voice note there as well, 87222. Comments coming from you. Peter says, can't the police move these two idiots with placards standing behind Claire? Surely it's harassment. I did mention this the other day. There's a really curious thing about this, OK? It does happen from time to time. If you broadcast on College Green, which is in the shadow of the mother of all parliaments, there's a reason why you talk to politicians there, because you can. That's the beauty of our democracy. We're able to, you can get that close. I mean, Americans look at this, they see a protest outside Parliament, they go, really? They're allowed to do that? Over here we'd have the riot police out. We don't have that. We don't do that. We are a democracy. That doesn't mean it doesn't become agitating from time to time. And that's one such example. That pair of nut jobs that seem to be keen to rejoin the EU, I don't think anybody gave them the results of 2016, have appeared almost daily on news bulletins this week, not just with with us. They are just down there all the time. So the curious counter is, and don't get me wrong, I find it intensely annoying, mainly not just from a broadcast point of view, but actually from a human point of view, that there are humans who live among us who would waste their time. I mean, these people don't have a job. They're just standing there with placards going, rejoin the EU. Is that it? What do you think you're going to achieve by being on the telly or the radio doing that? So there is that. There is the overarching argument that in a democracy, against the backdrop of the mother of all parliaments, you have to take that from time. It's the way it is. It's just the way it is. Still bloody annoying, though, isn't it? And this one from Freddie. Morning, Ian. Great show, as always, on the tequila story. Whatever happened to people taking responsibility for their own actions? This is the story of a woman who, I think she was an American woman, who, and I mean, the detail of this is actually quite, I find this unbelievable, but it's not entirely unprecedented. She was an American woman. She fell down some stairs on a cruise ship after 14 tequila shots. 14 tequila shots. Now, tequila's not a nice bit of kit, really, is it? You do it for a giggle, and 14 of those, I would be on... I would literally be dead. There would be paramedics surrounding me. So she fell down some stairs on a cruise ship after 14 tequila shots. She's won £220,000 in damages. A jury in Florida found that Carnival Cruise Line acted negligently after lawyers argued that the 45-year-old, Diana Sanders, was overserved alcohol on board. So, right, OK, you're on a cruise ship, you're having a bit of a laugh, bit of a giggle, you know, you might have one too many. I think it's the responsibility of the individual. I don't know whether the bar staff can keep a tally on how much you've drunk. Her lawyers argued that was the case. She fell down the stairs because she was absolutely plastered and has got £220,000. So what's that, $350 or whatever, $1,000, whatever it is? $300,000. It's just extraordinary. Anyway, the point I was reading from Freddie is whatever happened to responsibility? This sort of thing should never have been taken to court and definitely not awarded a stupid sum of money that the person received. Everyone has to start taking accountability for their own actions, and that includes our politicians. I can remember being at school. This is absolutely true, because we see this over here now. This kind of litigation was only ever kind of an American thing. In the playground, kid came to school and said, guess what happened in America? It's like, what happened? Right. Bloke fell over on a floor, got $500,000. What do you mean he fell over on a floor, got $500,000? He slipped on a wet floor that somebody had just mopped, and he got $500,000 compensation. It sounded like the weirdest story anyone had ever heard. Really? Only in America. That was the line. Only in America. You can sue for anything. Oh, look, I've had a McDonald's apple pie. Or was it a KFC? Whichever one it was. I burnt my gum on an apple pie. Here's $2 million. Only in America. Better Call Saul. You know the thing. You've got to do that every time. Only in... Not anymore. We do this kind of nonsense over here. The same sort of legal brains are circling. This was in Florida, as it turned out, but 220,000 English pounds in her pocket for getting absolutely K-lied and falling down the bloody stairs. The usual... My nan would have said, serves herself right, silly cow. 0344 499 1000. More from you on the way. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Welcome back. Ian Collins in for Jeremy Carl for this week and next. Lots to get through. Busy show as ever. Each time we come in the morning, you sort of hope for maybe some more positive news or something great to talk about. Sadly, there is real concern out there on a number of issues, and this particular story has taken us to Epsom in leafy Surrey, a place that, you know, would have been the backdrop to tranquility, some racing, and just general peace and sanity. But something horrendous happened there at the weekend, and we have no description from the police as to who might be responsible or who is wanted. 5 days later, it's silence. Let's get a voice note on this from David.
Hi, Ian. David from London here. I'm just watching those photos of Epsom, and again, another example of two-tier, heavy-handed policing. They're all standing there in riot gear. Everyone there is there because they are upset as to what happened in Epsom, men and women standing there protesting. But the police, again, are there fully kitted out in riot gear. Now, if that was a far left or a Palestinian hate march, the police wouldn't be in riot gear. So why, again, do we have two-tier policing?
It's very hard. I've had so many debates about the two-tier policing accusation. Depends on which police officer you speak to. Some will go, no, it's not two-tier policing. It's where we think something's more likely to kick off. Others will say, yes, it is two-tier policing. It does sort of divide the room, even in policing circles. Let's speak with Maggie Oliver, big friend of the station, former detective with Greater Manchester Police, and has worked tirelessly in more recent years for the rights of girls, of victims of rape and assault and gang-based criminality against women and girls. Maggie, good morning to you.
Good morning, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. I mean, look, let's not lose track, as you can in these kind of cases. There is a victim here on a Saturday morning after coming out of a nightclub. It's a journey that most girls, most women are aware that can be perilous just by dint of the hours and the fact that people are intoxicated. But no one, despite anything, deserves to be attacked in any form. And this was particularly brutal because it was a rape, it was a gang rape, it was cold, it was dark, and it was against the backdrop of a church. I mean, it's the kind of stuff that you would see in a horror flick, for goodness sake. What you do hope, of course, is that the police are on it. They say they are doing their best. I've no doubt that the diligence of the police in Epsom and Surrey is exactly that. But we haven't got any information. And naturally, because we've seen this play out before, there is concern about that. And naturally, 5 days does seem a long time before at least giving some information about who the hell the police are looking for.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Ian. I mean, it could, you know, I am a former police officer, a former detective, and it does take time sometimes to get descriptions from really traumatized victims. But I still believe that the vacuum of information and the complete lockdown, the silence around this, will feed into the lack of trust that the public now have in the police and in the state, based on previous cases like Southport, like the arena bombings, like the Nottingham case. You know, we and actually I can even tie this into my own history with the grooming gangs, rape gangs, whatever. You know, I knew 20 years ago what was happening on the streets of this country, and yet the state, the government, silenced it and protected the abusers because of a fear of being accused of being racist. You know, when I started to speak out, I was very much a lone voice. But the people in those communities knew what was happening. And I would suggest that the people within Epsom have got a lot of information that is coming from the streets. But if we don't get information, then we will see, fear erupting into public disorder. And I think that we're almost a week into this now. There should be information of some kind. It may not be as detailed as we would like, but there has to be something shared with the public. That's my, crime, rape, violence, abuse of women and children is against the law. And my question would be that if there is a real suspicion that these abusers are from a different culture.
Yep.
I've read things online. I don't know if that's true or not, but would we have the same reticence in sharing detail if it was a gang of young white lads who had been out drunk on a Saturday night? That's the question that the public are asking. And
Indeed.
We've repeatedly a cover-up when we look at different ethnicities, and we can't have that. We've got to have a law that is equal, that is fair.
Absolutely. Is it two-tier policing, Maggie? Does that overstate it for you as a former officer? I know you're very proud of your time in the police. Well, what do you feel when you hear that phrase, two-tier policing?
I mean, I think we're being driven as a country by people who are frightened of the truth, and it seems to be wrapped up in ethnicity and culture, and people from different backgrounds coming to the country, and they're really, really difficult conversations to have. There are good people and bad people everywhere, whichever community you look at, whichever religion you look at. But we have to be willing to grasp that there are also very bad people in all different religions and cultures and countries, and we must treat them all equal according to the law. And I think that's what we're not seeing. We're seeing the truth being hidden. If there is any suggestion of somebody of a different background, we can't have that, Ian. We
can't have that. And it would, look, the first time I remember reading about grooming gangs was, I know there's a lot of speculation online about who was the first person to raise this. The first thing I read, you'll be familiar with Andrew Norfolk at the Times, who published a piece on this back in 2011. I'd never read anything quite like it, and I slightly didn't want to believe, not that the cases hadn't happened, that there was some kind of cover-up. You were aware of it back then. People like Sammy were talking about it, Jane Senior, others had kind of raised these sort of issues. It didn't really get the traction it should have got back then. And I wonder whether it's because people just simply couldn't believe that. Firstly, the fact that it happened, okay, we get that. The fact that, police were turning up, they were told not to pursue things or told not to charge someone. In some cases, young girls were told, you shouldn't be drinking alcohol at 11, despite the fact that 4 of them had just walked out of a 45-year-old man's house at midnight, or stories such as that. We've seen this repeated time and time again, because it seemed unbelievable that in our Western democracy, this would happen. What, social workers wouldn't raise the flag, or teachers or clinicians, right across the board, everything that you've brilliantly worked on, Maggie, seemed unbelievable. So we now know this to be true. We now know that there were cover-ups. There were people that individually they will say, well, I was told to do this, I was told not to pursue that, which is why it's quite hard to sometimes pin down individuals, because these collective decisions sort of override things. Hopefully we will get some results in the inquiry. But because of that, we now have a definitive precedent for how things can get covered up. We've even seen more recently, Nottingham, of course, don't really want to be sectioning somebody who's black who monkeys around with knives, because that could be seen as, racist. Even with Southport, a teacher raising the issue of this guy that was out of control, and someone telling a head teacher, you're only coming to that conclusion because it's a black kid with a knife. That is criminal. Whoever said that to that head teacher should be facing charges. And now, so when we have Epsom, it may turn out to be something totally different, but we've been fed this constant drip of these kind of cases. It's our go-to position now. Something is afoot. We're not being told something.
Yeah, you know what, you've kind of done a whistle-stop tour through the last 20 years of my life. You talked, I was on a case in 2005 where 97 child rapists were allowed to walk the streets because GMP closed that case down, unwilling to put resources in. Now, what I have seen is corruption at the highest levels. I do believe we all have to take personal responsibility and speak out, whether you're a police officer or a social worker.
Yeah.
But the book very clearly stops at the top. And all those officers there on the streets in the riot gear, they're there because they've been told to be there. When I challenged the top bosses, I was told I would go to prison. So what we're seeing now is the public have seen all that before.
Maggie, just on that point, why were you given that kind of threat, as it were? What was the thinking behind it? That you were making something up that had racial...
No, I was not making anything up, but I was the problem because I was not going to remain silent. And I made it very, very clear to the Chief Constable, Head of Public Protection, everybody, that I was going to go public if they did not do something about this.
So they argued that you going public would be an imprisonable offence. Was that the gist of it?
You, as a police officer, you signed the
Of course.
Secrets Act. So, but I accepted that risk because I already seen 2 cases where God knows how many children had been abandoned to their abuse. And then at exactly the time I was on the Rochdale case, that was my second case, Andrew Norfolk's story came out. What the difference with Andrew's story was that he brought it into London, into a national dynamic. This had been going on in the north of England for many, many years. And Pryor was the first person to talk about it in the 1990s.
And she got a right pasting from her own party for that.
She lost her job. You know, she lost her job in the cabinet.
Yep.
But she's telling the truth. So what we're seeing now is the next phase of this cover-up of the facts. And this time it won't wash, Ian. It really will not wash. We have to have transparency. We have to have honesty. And we have to have rapists all treated the same and not protected. And what we have seen in Southport, in Nottingham, and, people who really now understand what's going on won't stand for it anymore. And I think we need to rebuild trust in the police, and that won't happen unless those at the top grasp the nettle and speak it as it is.
I've just had a text, interestingly, from a friend who's interestingly a serving officer with Greater Manchester Police. I won't name him. He's texted me personally to say, come on, Ian, you know full well there are often reasons why we cannot name or aren't able to name somebody that might be suspected of a crime. Now, I understand that, and I will just say in response, essentially reflecting what you're saying as well, Maggie, that can be the case, but given everything you and I have just talked about for the last 10 minutes, there is concern. Could the police, though, given that concern, could they have some kind of press conference and the chief down there at Epsom to stand up and say, look, I know this isn't desirable. We literally do not have a description of these people. There are many reasons why that. The victim is unable to give us that description. Therefore, we're trawling through CCTV. Would that be helpful, Maggie?
I think transparency and honesty and communication is key to everything in so many cases. You know, the officer you've just mentioned, nobody's asking anybody to name the suspect. That would never happen because it would undermine a criminal case anyway. But the detail of what happened on Saturday night has to be shared with the community in Epsom. And without that transparency and without that conversation, we are not going to regain trust in the police in Epsom. It will come at some point.
Sure.
But the question is how much damage will be caused between now and then.
That is it, Maggie, on that point. Lovely to see you again, by the way. Thank you for coming on with us. She is, of course, Maggie Oliver, former detective with Greater Manchester Police, has since been seen as a whistleblower, but she's a writer, a broadcaster. She talks, she campaigns, and she's been absolutely outstanding in this area. Thank you to her. More from you on the way, 0344 499 1000. On a lighter note, we'll get the latest sports news. It was a squeaky bum time for Arsenal last night, but they just about did it. Details coming next. Martin Lipton joins us from The Sun. And, of course, your comments on 0344 499 1000. It's coming up on 10 to 9. This is Talk.
Some breaking news this morning revealed that under the Terrorist Act, 242 people were arrested in the year to June of this year.
That's something you can indulge in, as to all the people
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just gone 10 to 9, it is Talk. Steve says, morning Ian, Epsom, the first thing the police do is go door to door for doorbell footage. You've already mentioned CCTV. We're the most watched society in the world, and there isn't any. Then to see the police stood in full riot gear is despicable. One could be left to leap to a conclusion that the state is actively trying to provoke a local population. Yeah, I mean, obviously they're looking for CCTV. I don't dispute they're not looking for. Of course they want to say it's been a terrible, terrible crime. But we need sort of something. We need something back, not riot gear. Mary is in Hemel Hempstead. Mary, what have you got for us? Good morning to you.
Good morning, Ian. This crime that's taken place is not a traditional white crime. Usually white rapists are individuals, you know, or people in the family. The only time of gang rape seems to occur when it comes to people coming from another culture. It's the same with the knife crime. Machetes are not a British sort of traditional crime, but they have been imported now, right, from mostly the black community. And unfortunately,
so you're saying there are demographic considerations on certain crimes. I don't know what, I have to say in balance, I don't know what the specific evidence or stats would say on that. I do know that there are certain crimes that people, different groups are disproportionately represented. I think that's the point you're making.
Yes, that's true. And, well, it just seems to be another cover.
But there was never you know, up until recently, Mary, this is the bit I can't get my head around. Maybe 5 years ago, you know, you'd have watched Crime Watch. They'd have said they're looking for a black man or a white man or a brown man. They wouldn't have shied away from that. What's happened?
Well, you tell me.
We live in a really... yes, and I can only... certainly on the immigration issue, if that is the area we're looking at, then there's definitely been some acceleration on sensibilities around that. But for fear of there being some kind of uprising. And, you know, we know what happened when they didn't give information. And here we are again.
Yes. But I can remember the posters up in shop windows, wanted. They used to call on the public to assist the police. And the police and the public did. We used to go around, I can remember when I was young, going around seeing these pictures, and in the paper, they were in the newspapers.
I mean, wanted posters go back to the old Wild West days, right? I mean, they were, you know, Jack the Ripper posters back in Victorian London. I mean, the wanted poster, you looking for someone, show a description of them in some shape or form. Mary, thank you very much indeed for that. And I do think now we're at a time where Surrey Police needn't worry about riot gear. If the chief over there stands up, or certainly the localised chief, stands up and explains the vacuum when it comes to information on this. I mean, this is an incredibly serious crime. I mean, it's a gang rape of a young girl on a cold, dark Saturday night outside a church. I think people have the right, as citizens, concerned locals, you have a right to know a bit more about what the progress of that police operation is. That's reasonable. In fact, it's incumbent on the police to give that information. If they don't have it, then give us some detail on what is happening in order for you to be in a position where you don't have it, if that makes sense. Do that, at least. 0344 499 1000. 4 minutes to 9 o'clock. Let's get some sports.
90 minutes in 90 seconds. From The Sun.
Martin Lipton is with us, chief sports reporter at The Sun. Martin, morning to you. I've got to say, as a Chelsea supporter, I was hoping that Arsenal would do the treble last night in terms of getting knocked out of stuff, but they just about snuck through.
Yeah, they did their best to, didn't they,
yeah.
Ian? I mean, they poor again. That's one win now in 5 matches, the draw last night, and they are a team that is absolutely running on empty at the moment. You can see that. They're stumbling towards the line, but they're running out of any sort of momentum. They lost to Bournemouth on Saturday, and they were terrible. They weren't much better last night, and they were lucky that Sporting offered not a great deal. And on Sunday is the biggest test yet. They go to Manchester City.
Yeah.
If they get a draw, they probably win the league. But if they lose, you feel that the race would have turned hugely in City's direction. Arsenal are not the team they were just a couple of months ago. They really are. There's been injuries, but it's more about the lack of belief when you see them now. They're playing with fear, in constricted, wearing a sort of a mental straitjacket.
It is extraordinary, isn't it, how this kind of turns around in this way. I've been saying for the last couple of months, to me, the most interesting part of the Premier League this season has been the bottom of it. In fact, in many respects, it still is. You've got Forest, you've got West Ham and Spurs battling it out. Give us your assessment, if you would, Martin. I mean, at the moment, you know, Spurs are in the zone, but that could easily flick around over a match or two?
No.
You think it's going to stay that way?
They're dead. Everyone knows I'm a Tottenham fan.
Yeah.
I cannot see a way out.
Every Spurs fan says this, though. When I talk to every Spurs fan, you're absolutely sure you're going down.
It's been heading this way since December, and nobody at the club realised it. Yeah. It was blaring out with huge alarm bells, and they shut their eyes and closed their ears and wouldn't see what was looming in front of them, and now it's too late to change. And the new manager will make a difference, but it's too late. He's a good manager. I've got no issue at all with the appointment in terms of his managerial skills. Yeah. He's inherited an absolute disaster zone.
All you got to do is win another match and West Ham to lose one. Come on.
They ain't going to win a match. They're rubbish.
Well, you've also just lost your main man as well.
Well, we've lost every time we play, we lose someone. I mean, that's football, isn't it? But also, injuries are part of football. Deal with it.
Yeah. I was going to say, it's not as if, oh my goodness, a player hurt his leg. That's not. That should not really be headline news. You know, the reason you have multi hundreds of millions of pounds worth of legs to choose from is for that eventuality.
Well, you would know that being a Chelsea fan. You've got more legs than most.
Well, we finish with 10 men regularly for different reasons. Listen, great to have you on, Martin. Martin Lipton, chief sports reporter at The Sun, with the latest on what is happening. I mean, it is a battle there. I think Forest are probably slightly safer territory, only by a point. West Ham and Spurs, I mean, that could, of course, naturally all change. We know that could all change, and you've only got to get to the weekend and see for yourself as to whether or not Spurs can do a job on Brighton. But don't hold your breath, as you just heard from Martin. 0344 499 1000 is where you'll find us. Loads to come in the last hour. It's on its way. You're listening to the Home of Common Sense. This is Talk. Let's get the latest headlines. The time is 9 o'clock.
Over the past 36 hours, the United States and its partners have launched Operation Epic Fury, one of the largest, most complex, most overwhelming military offensives the world has ever seen. Nobody's seen anything like it. We have hit hundreds of targets in Iran, including Revolutionary Guard facilities, Iranian air defense systems. Just now, it was announced that we knocked out 9 ships plus their naval building, all in a matter of literally minutes. Iran's formerly supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is dead.
I spoke to you about the situation in the Gulf and explained that the United Kingdom was not involved in the strikes on Iran. That remains the case. The basis of our decision is the collective self-defense of long-standing friends and allies and protecting British lives. That is in accordance with international law, and we are publishing a summary of our legal advice. We are not joining these strikes, but we will continue with our defensive actions in the region.
Mr Farage, would a reform government have allowed US forces to use UK air bases for offensive operations in Iran?
Yes is the answer to your question. I would have said to the Americans, please do use our bases. We will be supportive of you on this.
There were a series of very loud blasts in the area of Dubai that I'm based in. That's in the marina area. It's a very touristy area, actually. Those blasts were the loudest we've heard yet, but equally we are reassured that they are most likely the sound of interception by the UAE's quite sophisticated THAAD interception kit. That is the Terminal High Altitude Area Defence System.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is indeed Talk Breakfast. Good morning. Welcome to the home of common sense. It is our last hour. You're listening to Ian Collins. Jeremy Kyle is away for the rest of this week and for next week. Lots going on. Still continuing to take your calls and amazing messages. There is a law and order theme here this morning, whether it's the police not investigating paedophiles, shoplifting going up by 133%, jaw-dropping number. Our eyes just glaze over and go, yeah, it's another shoplifting thing. It used to be a serious... When I was a kid, that was a serious crime. What the hell happened? And over in Epsom, it's a terrible scene there right now. Police investigating after several men attacked a woman in Epsom. This is in the early hours of Saturday morning. Despite 6 trillion CCTV cameras, they failed to release any kind of description. Now, the police will say, look, we're working on this. We, as yet, haven't got a description. It seems curious. I think we need to know. Naturally, locals got very upset about this, met up for a very gentle, quiet, unassuming protest in the high street, only to be met with dozens of officers in riot gear. Riot gear that the police were unable to find in Clapham the other day, when hundreds of feral teens were looting and shoplifting out of God knows how many shops. We are living in curious times. 0344 499 1000. And social media is on the agenda as well. As for a second time, members of Parliament voted down the proposition of banning social media for under 16s. On the face of it, it sounds like, yeah, it's obviously a good idea. Who wants under 16 to see hardcore porn and violence and all the rest of it? There is a thin end of a wedge theory around banning areas, particularly areas that also proffer news amidst all the chaos of X and various other social media feeds. You can still find news in there as well, and I'm not absolutely comfortable with the government telling me what I can and cannot read, because that's where the next base might be. Let's get a word on the other big story, all the other big stories of the day. Isabel Oakeshott, Talk's international editor, is with us. Morning to you, Isabel. Let's start in Epsom, where, you know, confusion reigns supreme, allegations of two-tier policing. It's already out there. I think this could be solved. I understand, and we've spoken to police officers, Isabel, this morning, it is possible that you haven't got a description. The victim is unable to give one for whatever reason. It is possible, in which case, bearing in mind the level of anger that is now out there on the streets, it might be an idea for a very senior police officer to stand up and explain that from time to time this does happen and we simply haven't got an accurate description as yet. But right now we have nothing.
Ian, you'll have to fill me in a little on the background of this story, because I'm not totally across it. Is this the issue as to a suspect and...
Indeed, the suspect, they've given... Yes, so an attack on Saturday evening in Epsom, and absolutely nothing from the police 5 days later. They say we haven't got a description. Now, it's possible not to have a description, but of course... The overarching point that we're looking at here, Isabel, is that we've been in this territory before where we've said, look, we need to know a little bit more about it, if for no other reason than, you know, a next potential victim, if for no other reason than people to say, oh, yes, somebody in a yellow hoodie, the boy next door to us wears a yellow, that kind of thing. It seems that holding back on information is a spectacular own goal for the police in the current climate.
Absolutely. So of course I can comment on that, because this is a pattern that we've seen, and it was most spectacularly in evidence post the Southport murders. And there, in that case, as we all now know, the police very deliberately withheld information about the suspect, and that led to all manner of speculation, which was very unhelpful. They're still open, I think, to considerable criticism for releasing a picture of Axel Rudikabana looking like a Welsh choir boy, when the actual mugshot of him taken by the police post the crimes was pretty much painting a very different picture. I think the trouble is that in a vacuum, all sorts of unhelpful rumours spread, and often a community is actually right about what they're speculating, but sometimes they're wrong. And I think we've gone way too far on this sort of blanket blackout, as it were, post a crime. The law has sort of changed a bit, particularly media law, in terms of what you can and can't report after somebody has been arrested versus after somebody has been charged. And I think it's gone far too much the other way now, and that the public are not being given information. I mean, I'm aware of a most horrific case involving an Afghan refugee stroke asylum seeker stroke, I don't know exactly what his status was, and we won't hear about what that person did, perhaps for a year, because of reporting restrictions and the length of time it takes for cases to get to court. I don't think that's in the public interest.
Yeah. And of course, we know Southport being kind of the totemic example, I suppose, of all of this, certainly in recent times, because if we don't get information, then social media mischievously and often, and in the case of Southport, rather dangerously, does its thing by putting a name out on social media. The name wasn't even a name. I think it was some sort of Arabic dialect for "would you like a cup of tea" or something, but it didn't stop about 2 million people sharing that name. This was a man that came over on a boat 3 days ago. This is what he's done. And that's not good, and nobody is defending that. It's idle and it's dangerous, but that's what happens if you don't get information from the authorities.
Yes, that's right. I mean, there's obviously a limit to what they can do. I understand that there's a balance.
Of course.
But telling us that somebody is, a local boy from Bristol, when clearly they came over on a boat, this is just a hypothetical example, they came over on a boat 3 years ago, doesn't give people the full picture and makes people feel like they're being hoodwinked by the authorities.
Correct.
And that is not in anybody's interests. What's in all our interests? We have to get to the bottom of why so many asylum seekers who are given safe haven in our country are linked to heinous crimes. Not all of them, of course, but there is a clear and data-proven link there. And people are understandably nervous and they want that information. And it's not unreasonable. And I don't think the police are yet routinely gathering that kind of data in the way that would give policymakers and politicians the best possible a chance of addressing what it may reveal.
Well, we play Russian roulette every day, don't we, with rubber boats coming across the channel. We have no idea who's on those boats, and even if we said that 90% of those people, possibly even more, mean no harm to anybody, perfectly reasonable, law-abiding folk who just try to change their life. It's not the way to do it, but that's their intention. I get all of that. We just don't know who the other 10% are, and I think that is a big ask of the British public to take that risk. Put these people in a house just opposite where you live, because they're moving people out of hotels now, and take the risk. We're asked you to take the risk. Who are they? We don't know. Where are they from? We don't know. What's their background? We don't know. They just came from Iran. We're at war with Iran. Is that not a little dangerous? Is that not a bit of a risk? No, it's fine. And we are, you're right. And the minute the authorities, the government, I suppose, Isabel, based on what you've just said, the minute they do overtly and publicly announce that there is disproportionality from this cohort in terms of certain crimes, then it makes their job a whole lot harder, doesn't it? Because their defences of not being able to solve immigration rather go out the window, because we'd be in a very obvious public safety sphere.
And look, that is obviously what the authorities are trying to avoid.
Yep.
You know, they know that the UK is a tinderbox at the moment, that feelings are rightly running incredibly high about the stunning generosity with which we welcome in people whose backgrounds and intentions we have zero idea about, and who may or may not behave properly once they get to our country. And, you know, I've done a lot of reporting on this and on the attitudes of these asylum seekers, and including in the migrant camps in Calais and Dunkirk, where most of the people that my investigations have spoken to basically have no idea about Britain. They have no idea what they're coming to. They have no plan of any contribution that they're going to make. They may not wish us ill, but they're certainly not expressing any desire to make a net contribution. And under the circumstances where people are struggling, where hardworking Brits are getting up early, working really long hours for ever diminishing returns, of course they're resentful. Of course they are. When they see people coming in who've paid nothing into the system, being given everything and more for free. And that is why we have such a febrile atmosphere, and why the authorities are so nervous of revealing the ethnicity and asylum seeker status in particular of people linked to wrongdoing.
And is it two-tier policing that we're seeing here, do you think, with Epsom and those kind of cases?
I mean, I think we've got a huge two-tier policing problem across the country. I think we've got a two-tier problem in all sorts of sectors. I'm pretty exercised about the GP that was struck off for asking a woman, a female patient, to remove her veil in an appointment because he repeatedly couldn't understand or hear what she was saying. We can ill afford to lose GPs at this point, never mind on silly points of principle like that. If a doctor can't hear what a patient or a patient's mother is saying, how can they possibly give good treatment? I think this sends out completely the wrong message. And it's, again, just more kind of bending over backwards to accommodate excessive cultural sensitivities that don't actually align with our values in the UK.
A word while you're with us, Isabel. A couple of stories here. Shoplifting surges by 133% in 5 years. I mean, the only thing that surprised me about that is I thought it would be slightly higher, but it's still a jaw-dropping number, 133%. We're almost in that place of decriminalising shoplifting, it seems. Talk, as you will be aware, did that report the other day. Well, of course you're aware of sending people into shops to see how easy it was to walk in and out with produce unchallenged. I mean, this is just an everyday occurrence. I even saw it myself a couple of weeks ago in my local supermarket. Somebody just
And what did you do, Ian? Did you say anything?
No, I did. I actually, the guy did a very crafty thing. He was standing on the scanning machine, the self-scanner, next to me, and he got out a card, and if I hadn't been looking accidentally in that direction, I would never have seen this. And it was obviously a card that didn't work, and he tapped it on the thing, took it away, put it away, and walked out again. And I didn't think twice about this at first, and I thought, that didn't scan. I know it didn't. There was no bleep. I could see his screen. It didn't say anything. But I was trying to just make head or tail of it. I thought, did he just do that? Have I missed something here? Is there something else? And off he went, and I said to the woman, I said, that guy didn't pay. He just tapped a card, and she went, "Oh, right, okay." And she said something to it. They often have a little headphone piece going on, and said something. I don't know. I don't think anything happened, because in that time I could see the door. I was quite near the door, and no one got stopped. And I would imagine that kind of stuff is what I saw there was probably quite a well rehearsed method of shoplifting, because it looks to the cameras as if you're paying for something.
Yeah, and I suppose it's quite clever as well, because if you do get stopped, you can say, "Oh, I thought I tapped my card." You can see on your camera, I tapped my card. I'm trying to go through, and in a way, the supermarkets have only themselves to blame for that. They've forced these wretched self-checkout tills on all of us, and that is the price they pay for dramatically reducing their labour costs. I don't really know anyone who prefers using those tills to actually interacting with a human. And there are so many shops now where there's basically not a single human till. So you're forced into that process. But our own research last week that we revealed exclusively on Talk suggests that shoplifters don't have to even bother going through that little choreography. They can just walk out. You know, my colleague Christian Drogan went into 5 or 6 supermarkets with a black rucksack, wearing a hoodie, looking pretty questionable, and was able to fill that rucksack with cheap goods and wasn't stopped by anyone, any member of the public or any security staff in any of the supermarkets. He later put all the goods back again. We didn't steal anything, but it shows just how easy it's become.
Yeah, indeed. Listen, Isabel, thank you for being with us. Always good to hear from you. Isabel Oakeshott, Talk's international editor, with us on the
I suppose it's quite
program.
clever as well, because...
And I think, well, Isabel was there for a second, she's gone. Thank you to her. Over to you, 03444991000. She's right about the self-checkout thing, though. Yesterday, did I have a mayor simply trying to weigh my spuds? You wouldn't have thought that would be beyond the couple of beautiful baked potatoes ready to go. Stick them on the scales because the scale is the same thing. Enter looked up item, found potatoes, pressed potatoes. This thing didn't want to know. This was getting personal, I'm telling you. I thought, well, you know it's potatoes because I've just told you it's potatoes. The woman came along eventually, after I'd gone for about 5 goes, pressed potatoes. It weighed them. Perfect. This was discrimination. This was absolute discrimination. Because there's a little camera there. It looked at me, it thought, it's Collins. Yeah. We're going to give him some spud chip here. And boy, did I get it. They are infuriating. And of course, the unexpected item in the bagging area, despite the fact... How long's that been going on for? 20 years now? Unexpected. You'd have thought by now, you know, there's a lot of technology out there. They would have sorted that one out. Still not sorted that one out. 03444991000. We'll have more from you in a few moments' time. Coming up on 9:20, this is Talk.
The world is on fire. Russia, Iran, China, conflicts brewing in all of their different regions. They're not waiting. But here in Britain, our armed forces are underfunded, they're undermanned, and they're underprepared. And nobody in government wants to talk about it. Well, we do. I'm Philip Ingram, and I spent my career in the world of intelligence, military planning, strategic planning, and unfortunately, conflict. This is Talk War, and this is where we analyse the conflicts shaping our world.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. We were just talking there about shoplifting. One of our producers, Mark, has just said to me he knows a bit about driving buses and coaches and the like. You know, when you get on a bus now, it's very rarely a cash transaction. It's usually a card of some sort, so it bleeps the card. And he was saying that kids have a bleep sound effect on their phone. So when you think they're bleeping in, beep, they've just pressed a button. I mean, it's imaginative. I'll give them that. Some of them literally do an impression of a bleep as they go past. Christian, our producer, spotted that the other day. Kids just getting on a bus going beep. And there's so many beeps going off. The bus driver is going beeping hell. What's going? They all get on. It's not worth the challenge. Usually, nobody wants to have their head caved in over a £2 ticket or whatever it happens to be. 0344 499 1000. The other headline we're looking at here this morning is Labour's absolute ineptitude in imposing a very simple rule that the Supreme Court delivered around about almost a year to the day, I think I'm right in saying. Julie Bindel, the journalist and founder of Justice for Women, is with us. Morning to you, Julie.
Good morning, Ian.
I think we are sort of on the anniversary, aren't we, of that pretty much of the Supreme Court ruling?
Yes, it's today. It was a year ago.
Oh, it is literally today. OK, so
yes.
There you go. It's completely on the day there. Happy anniversary, we should say, to everybody involved. I mean, this is... I've got a 7-year-old who knows what a woman is, and that shouldn't be controversial that I say that, but apparently it is controversial in today's world. However, if anybody was in any doubt, you know, is it a person with a beard and a penis? Could they still be? The Supreme Court did a lovely job, didn't even take them that long, relatively speaking, in saying, no, it's biology, it's a woman, that is a woman, and that's what we accept. So therefore, from that moment on, you'd have thought, frankly, within hours, anyone who was confused about that with their changing room signs and toilet signs would have sprung into action and done what they were essentially asked to do. That has not happened in no small part due to the ineptitude of this government, Julie.
Yes, and obviously there isn't one person on the planet, including extreme trans activists, who don't know what a woman is. What they do is that they insist, because it is the men that claim to be women, that men can encroach upon women's spaces, the spaces that girls use. Some of them are, of course, sexual predators, because a minority of men are sexual predators. But many of them are just absolutely incensed at the idea that they should be kept out of these spaces, which feminists like me and others before me had to fight for to get enshrined in legislation.
Yeah.
What the government has done since the Supreme Court ruling, which clarified the fact that in the Equality Act, which of course protects any person potentially discriminated against, including those that live as the opposite sex, that never mind that, they will be protected from discrimination and from being sacked, for example, or kicked out of their apartment because they're transgender or identify as such. But what they clarified is that within that act, in other words, within the law of the land, a woman and girl means biological female. And therefore, this means we have a right in law to single-sex spaces. But the government, of course, won't put out that guidance, which means that in workplaces, for example, or in public buildings, that there's still no clarification. Now, I suppose you could actually look at an analogy. You could look at an example of many years ago when smoking in buildings, in all public buildings, was banned. So we knew that the law was coming in. We'd had plenty of those public awareness information campaign adverts telling us why they were banning smoking in buildings. Imagine if the government hadn't clarified what that meant to pubs, to restaurants, to the workplace. It would be bedlam, and of course people would be lighting up. So they need to issue this, and the reason why they haven't, in my view, is cowardice. And in the example of Bridget Phillipson, I'm afraid it's because she wants to climb the greasy political pole.
Yeah, and it's extraordinary to me. And by the way, it's a great... There's your column today in The Sun. I mean, it's a great piece that you've written there. I've heard you talk about this kind of area for a long, long time. What fascinates me, though, Julie, is that, you know, you've been doing this a long time. I've been doing this a long time. It didn't quite come out of nowhere, but it was never a it was never about attacking people who were. I don't care how anybody wants to live. You know,
No.
I work and have lived in around the capital city for years. People take on all sorts of identities, weirdness, amazingness. They wear stuff, they do stuff, they have wacky. I don't care about any of that. That's fine what an individual wants to say they are. What you can't do is change language based on your own desired identity, and you can't change biological reality. Now, I don't think that is an extreme position. I mean, the idea that somebody like yourself is referred to as some kind of right-wing extremist is,
I know.
you know, and we've had goodness knows how many other, you know, well-known feminists who previously would have been described as somebody who speaks from the left, if that's the way to look at it, now suddenly described as if they're Eugene Terre Blanche or something. I mean, it's just an extraordinary position. But this is agitated not by, I would say, innocent people who've chosen to live as the opposite sex quietly for many years, but by the kind of gender mafia that have come out with this and saying, if I have a beard and a penis and want to call myself a woman, I have the right to enter that space. It's that group that have messed it up.
It is, and it's a very elite movement, and it's a top-down movement.
Yeah.
So that those that are most affected by this are those that don't have the protection in the workplace, such as the Darlington nurses, Sandy Peggy in Scotland, those that dare to speak out and say they don't want to get changed in front of male colleagues who are clearly male and who are masquerading as women. So it's a top-down movement. Much of it came from the universities, from the queer theory movement that says that basically there's no such thing as a woman or a man and we can all identify as we wish. Now, as you say, Ian, it doesn't matter how people define themselves. I welcome so-called gender non-conformity. I'm a lesbian. I grew up in a working class area in the northeast of England. I know that can be tricky, that can be difficult. The last thing that any of us want to do is to make it difficult for people that wish to dress in ways that are seen as weird or wrong for their sex. So we're against sex stereotypes. We want people to be able to live and dress and present as they wish. What we are railing against, and it's largely feminists that are against this, but it's not just feminists. We might have started the battle, but there's plenty more involved, including gay men, including people who don't want their children to be transitioned at school. You know, we are very adamant that we will not give away the spaces, the single-sex spaces that we fought for decades. And why do we have single-sex spaces? Let's have a think about it. It's not just because of modesty and embarrassment and being shy. Yes, of course, women have the right to have those spaces because they don't feel comfortable getting changed in front of men. It's because there are a minority of men who pose a danger.
Yeah.
They may be sexual harassers, they may even be sexual predators. The reason why we have women-only domestic violence refuges that we set up as volunteers is because there are women who are beaten and abused within the home and they have to escape, often with their children, and be protected from that man coming and stalking her and dragging her back home.
Yeah.
That's why they exist. I wish they didn't have to exist.
But the extremities of these, sorry, extremities is perhaps the wrong word in this case. The extremes, I should perhaps rephrase it as, in these kind of cases, are utterly bizarre. So a bloke that thinks he should be able to go to a woman's refuge, for example, I mean, I don't know with what kind of twisted mind. I mean, that's not about choice and identity.
Exactly.
That's a disruptor. That's someone who's making trouble, and dangerous trouble. Men who believe that they can call themselves a woman and then call themselves a lesbian, and if you didn't fancy them, Julie, as a gay woman, they could have you for discrimination, despite the fact they are a bloke, quite clearly, with male genitalia, but by calling themselves a woman should be enough for you, as a gay woman, to say, you're on the radar, love.
Well, this isn't even the worst of the madness. I mean, that clearly is mad enough. And the Supreme Court judges, when they heard the example of straight men claiming to be lesbians because they are sexually attracted to women and they pretend to be women, you could see they were thinking, what on earth? But there are these trans activists, these men who are online, on TikTok, on X, wherever, who are claiming to have menstrual cycles. I kid you not. They say they have female biology. There's one man in Canada, Jonathan Yaniv, who presented as Jessica Yaniv, who sued, who made the lives of, I think it was 7 or 8 female beauticians utter hell because they wouldn't give him a Brazilian wax on his male genitalia. And he tried to get them all fired and sued and lose their houses, etc. So these are nasty, extreme misogynists. And I've dealt with them over the decades as a feminist. But when I was dealing with them before transactivism became a thing for all of the institutions to bow down to, everybody, the liberals, the ordinary people with common sense, saw what these misogynistic men were doing to women, and they were on our side. Not this time. Every single institution became captured. The liberal elite all ended up having a trans-identified child and therefore closing down the debate. Regular, ordinary people, my family, anyone you talk to and present them with the facts, they agree with us. But it is an elite movement, and that's why it's taken so long to discredit it and show it for what it is.
Yeah, if you want a funny half hour, I was saying this to a previous guest about a different subject, but it's worth YouTubing men having periods, because there's a couple of absolute belters out there. There's one I remember seeing a couple of years ago, and this guy was going, I'm having my first period, and I thought, what? Is anybody going to say this? That we are not. But they don't, in their head, and at first I thought, oh, maybe this is just somebody satirising this whole crazy debate. But they were. I wish they were, because I could laugh along with that. But they were actually serious. They thought they were having a period. I don't know where they thought they were having the period, but there you go.
Well, I tell you, in 2003, when I wrote my first piece about this, I was astounded to find in a store, one of a chain called Transformations by Euston Station that I just happened upon, which was for cross-dressing men. It's what we called them in those days. We called them transsexuals or transvestites. They were cross-dressers. And that you could buy a pill to bring on symptoms of premenstrual tension. I kid you not.
Wow.
So this is a serious perversion.
So you could buy a pill to give you a stomachache, essentially, to put it in layman's terms.
It's just extraordinary the way this has morphed into what is seen as a civil rights movement. It isn't. It's a load of blokes that want to take our space away from us. And
what you've just touched on there, Julie, I think goes to the centre of it, really. Just a final point, civil rights movement. And that is what's sort of stopped people who should be, reasonably. You look at some of the characters in the Labour front bench and Phillipson and others. In any other day of the week, these would be intelligent people, but they are so ingratiated with the kind of civil rights aspect. Oh, it sounds like an ism or an obia if I have a view on this, so I better not. So they've kind of lumped in cross-dressing men with gay rights and racism and things like that, and decided it's all under the same umbrella when it's demonstrably not.
Quite. And also, we just have to look at who's in government, who has a position in government right now. Olivia Bailey, who is laughingly the Equalities Minister, and I forget the other part of her title, something about schools and children. When she was the women's officer at the National Union of Students, the NUS, in 2009, she was responsible for adding me as an individual to the list of no-platformed fascist organisations because of my so-called transphobia, because I had said that this is about sexist stereotypes and women deserve our own spaces. So Olivia Bailey added me to that list, and when I went to see her, to ask her, please remove me, this is causing me hellish reputational harm, and it means I can't go and talk to students, pro bono of course, about violence against women and how to end it, she refused. And that's Olivia Bailey now in the position that she's in.
Her other title, by the way, is Professional Half-Wit. I've just looked that up, so there we go. Now we know. Julie, lovely to see you. Thank you for coming on. Julie Bindel, joining us, journalist and founder of Justice for Women. Great piece in The Sun, page 10. Check it out in The Sun this morning. Lots more to get through. 0344 499 1000, 25 to 10. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, yeah, good morning. Home of Common Sense. Steve says, when Starmer takes us into further alignment with the EU, this Supreme Court judgment on women and spaces, will that get overturned? Well, somebody would definitely want to overturn. It is so bonkers. What happened before all of this kind of gender... This is not in any way... I know people who have changed their identity. I don't have a problem with calling somebody by whatever name they want to be called. Sometimes people have a nickname. A mate of mine who I used to work with didn't like his first name, so he just changed his name. He felt it was stronger and more kind of... more colourful in the sense of it took him to where he felt he was better represented by his moniker. That's an innocuous example of all of this. It's pretty straightforward stuff in that respect, you'd think. So I don't care if somebody wants to, grow their hair, put a bit of makeup on, or shorten their hair and never put makeup on. Whatever they want to do, and if they want to change their name, those people deserve our respect. And if there's other things going on and that's how they identify themselves, absolutely fine. You're not allowed to change language, by the way. You can't be changing pronoun. You can use your own anything nouns you like, but you can't expect other people to join in with that. That's just ridiculous, to be honest. And in fact, when you're having a conversation with somebody who says, I identify with these pronouns, you don't normally have to use pronouns when talking to the individual. It's only really referring to a he or a she that would come up. But I want full-on respect for those people. Whatever is going on and whatever took them into that journey where they felt that they were in either the wrong place, the wrong body, I get all of that. You'd have to be really super insensitive not to. I just don't think that's who we're dealing with when we talk about these subjects. So a bloke with an 8-inch willy and a big beard jumping into women's toilets because he likes wearing knickers does not constitute a woman, nor the aforementioned description of people who've got their own ideas of who they are. That's the group that have mucked it up for everybody else. 22:10 here on Talk. Let's get a voice note back to that story of Epsom this morning. This is Sarah. Morning, Sarah.
People are rightly upset, I think everybody's had enough of this kind of thing happening. But, they were protesting. They weren't smashing up anything. So why were the riot police there? The hate marches in, London and Brighton and everywhere else, they've carried on since the 7th of October. Not a riot police in sight. And yet there's some pretty hateful things being spread in those. So I do believe it's two-tier policing. I don't blame the frontline police officers because they're just following orders from the blob. So, as for the description of the attackers, well, normally, if they know anything about the attacker and he's white, it's said straight away. So I do have my own thoughts on that. And thankfully, I feel I can say that now because the Youssef said the same. So we'll see. I may be wrong, but it's certainly a very, very upsetting situation. Thanks, Ian.
Sarah, great message. Thank you very much indeed for that. We'll have more comment on that as well. And this story too, the GP who continued working after being suspended for asking a Muslim woman to remove her veil has now been struck off. You did hear that correctly. This is Dr. Keith Wolverson, suspended for misconduct after he repeatedly asked a woman to remove her niqab during an appointment, which she eventually did. He later said it was because she spoke poor English and he was struggling to understand her. That's all reasonable stuff, I would have thought. Rafe Heidel-Manku is with us, political commentator, historian and fellow at the New Culture Forum. Rafe, every now and again a story comes up and you think, no, I read it. It's either April the 1st or I've not read it correctly, so I better reread it. And then you reread it and you go, no, I still didn't read it correctly. And then you realise, no, this really is the story. This has actually happened. A GP who asked a woman to remove her veil so he could understand her has been struck off. What the hell is going on?
Yeah, you're very well to say that. It's time we actually spoke honestly here. It's time that we had a ban on the burqa and a ban on face coverings. And anyone who thinks it's far right or extremist or beyond the pale to make that claim need merely look over to their beloved old companions in the European Union, because France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Switzerland, Austria have all imposed bans on face coverings. I don't think any of those countries really can be accused of being far right by any measure. And let's be clear here. It's a doctor's duty is to provide the best care that they possibly can. And that means that they need to see, patients' faces, because there are, facial expressions can convey pain or, anxiety. The color of their lips are very important to be able to diagnose somebody. But even, of course, domestic abuse, a huge issue with many families, particularly also in certain ethnic communities. The ability to see whether a woman has bruises on her face. And so any veil that covers a face is going to make it impossible for a medical practitioner to really make a great assessment of that person's health. And it also has to be said, and people need to understand, these face coverings are not required by the Quran. They are not religious obligations.
Correct.
The most of the overwhelming majority, I would say, of Islamic scholars around the world say this is a cultural issue. I used to live in Knightsbridge, and I went on holiday to, I went to give a lecture in Dubai, and I saw more burqas in Knightsbridge than I did in Dubai. Yeah. This is not something that is required on people. And it is a personal choice. Personal choices must always play second fiddle to the requirements of public institutions.
Absolutely right. And not being able to understand somebody is, this is pretty paramount to a medical conversation. I've been on the receiving end of that, interestingly, where the doctor spoke, and I was with my mum. She was going through cancer treatment. We were going to get the results of her latest scan. So this is pretty crucial, very important stuff. And I really struggled to understand what the clinician was saying to me. And if it wasn't for an assistant who was also in the room, who kind of, I think, clocked this and thought, this is really difficult because we're talking about complexities, we're talking about treatment. I couldn't work out whether my mum was getting better, whether she was getting worse. It was awful. And somebody stepped in. I think they realised what had happened. So I've experienced, whichever way round you experience it, it's unacceptable in this setting. If you can't understand someone, and in this case, it's a doctor wanting to make somebody better who can't understand their poor command of English, then I think it's more than reasonable to raise it, and it's more than reasonable at times to be frustrated by it.
Yeah, in fact, you raised two important points there. One, of course, is that we've imported into this country so many people who can't speak English very well, but are actually practicing medicine in some capacity as a nurse, as a GP, but also in social care as well. And particularly when you're dealing with the elderly, there are real issues of communication which erodes trust. And of course, you've got misdiagnoses or social care workers who don't know how to actually understand what the person is saying if they're speaking with some sort of colloquial vernacular terms. And add to that a veil, a shield over your face. And my gosh, you completely erode the fundamental aspects of healthcare and social care, which is to build that relationship and that bond between the client and the practitioner. So this is extremely important. I think anybody who goes to a GP, to turn the tables on this, anyone who goes to see a GP or a nurse or whatever should have the right to insist that their face be uncovered. I don't think that anyone should be seen by somebody with a face covering. And but it should go more broadly. You don't just need to ban religious face coverings. I think you need to ban all face coverings. Security is very important. You see these gangs of feral youth in Clapham. You see these criminal gangs stealing mobile phones. They're all now wearing face masks and face coverings, something that's now become normalized because of COVID. But I think nobody in the public square, unless it's, below -5 Celsius, should be allowed to wear face coverings. CCTV was going to become useless if everyone's going to have face coverings. Terrorism as well.
Yeah.
So many of these terrorists are able to exploit all of this.
Well, it would rather clear the air, wouldn't it, if we were able to do something like that. This doctor can make a comeback, as I understand it. There were conditions on his registration. They imposed conditions on his registration for a further 12 months, so he might be able to return to the fold. He conceded that he might not have handled this correctly. Maybe his tone might have been a bit blunt. The last time I looked, being a bit blunt should not be a career-ending offence, frankly. That appears to have been the case here. I sense more than anything, Rafe, that this really comes down again to sensitivities of establishments like the medical profession, where they've got a PhD in this kind of nonsense. I mean, we saw it when somebody misgendered a sex offender or a paedophile or something quite recently, and all hell broke loose over that. So whilst, yes, maybe he wasn't polite in the way he asked, I don't know. But striking off a doctor, albeit temporarily, is horrific.
Yeah, and the problem here, of course, is that the British public are one of the top 3 most tolerant countries in the world. We are one of the world's top 3 least racist countries, behind only Brazil and Sweden. But that tolerance is getting stretched to the point perhaps where it's going to snap. And it's because of these ridiculous obsessions with sensitivity and political correctness that eventually you are going to get a backlash. The more, British people are very reasonable and sensible, but the more they see these outlandish things happening on a daily basis, the shorter that fuse becomes. And I worry about that. I think you are seeing an increase of intolerance in this country because there's this never-ending war of attrition against us and common sense. And so I would caution anyone who wants to be seen to be part of the Be Kind Brigade, be wary of what you're saying, because you might find the backlash to be rather more brisk than you could ever imagine.
Brisk being the right word. Rafe, thank you. Nice to see you again. Rafe Hadelman-Koo with us on the programme, political commentator and broadcaster. Thank you to him. This is a classic case where cultural assimilation reaches a point of utter ridiculousness, horror and danger. And, I don't know this doctor, and maybe he was sharp in the way he spoke. And that's fine. Look, I get that. You're meant to have a bedside manner as a clinician. I understand, be polite. Maybe he wasn't polite in the way he asked for this. There were other incidents in a similar field, apparently. But striking somebody off, I mean, the overarching narrative out of this should have been, it's a good point, if you have a bad command of English, that does happen in the NHS in all sorts of ways. You could be a tourist on holiday from Russia. You've probably got a bad command of English. We get that. If that is further compounded by your face covering, then I think it would be a good idea to say to doctors and to nurses, you are completely at liberty to ask somebody to remove it. It's a bit of cloth over your fizzog, for God's sake. I mean, let's grow up about this. 0344 499 1000. Elizabeth says, Anne in Yorkshire says, morning, Ian. I believe that the description of the Epsom rapists are withheld is because if, and it's a big if, they are found to have arrived on small boats illegally, then the government isn't directly responsible. Great show as ever. And thank you very much indeed. There is, unless it is true that there is no description, it's no good the old Bill in Surrey putting out a little press release going, we haven't got a proper description yet. This has got to a point where you've had riot cops on the streets because some locals decided to take to the streets and say, can we have a bit more information, please, about there's a poor girl here who's been brutally attacked by more than one person. It's a gang rape. And if that allegation is proved, then we have something terrible happening. So a bit of information would be good. So even if the senior officer on that patch did a little press conference, it would take, you wouldn't even have to do it, but you do it on a phone and release it on socials if you have to. Just go, look, I know it's unusual. We literally do not have a description of these people. The victim, unfortunately, due to the predisposition of the victim in this case, was unable to supply us with anything. We are going through CCTV and all sorts of issues. If they did that, we go, OK, that's fine. We get it. Those situations do exist. But at the moment, they've left a vacuum. Whenever there's a vacuum, the most dangerous word in politics is vacuum, because people, boy, will they fill it with all sorts of guff, hyperbole, mischief, you name it. That's how we ended up with the Southport issue that followed those brutal murders. 0344 499 1000. It's 10 to 10. This is Talk.
just trying to take credit, Keir Starmer, isn't he?
This man is not a leader. He's not the statesman that our country needs. He's failing us at every single level.
Donald Trump understands that Keir Starmer is fundamentally not a patriot.
Yeah.
He's not on the side of the West. He's been appeasing the Iranians in order to shore up his vote in this country.
In front of me is Waitrose, and I'm about to head in there. I literally openly put the stuff in my bag. I nervously walked to the front door, and away we go.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 0344 499 1000. Helen in Cheshire. This is disturbing. He says, when I was 16, I went to a GP for the pill. He asked me to strip off and showed me how to feel for lumps in my breast, and he wanted to do an internal examination. I pretended to have a period. He said, next time. There was no next time. This was in the early 80s in Harrogate. I was too shocked and embarrassed to tell anyone. This was so wrong. And now a GP has been struck off for asking a woman to remove her veil, says Helen. Man alive. So nothing happens if you ask somebody to strip off for... look, I'm not an expert on contraception, but I know that you don't need to take any clothes off to be given the pill. And if there was some kind of, I don't know, abdominal issue or some other esophageal issue with swallowing tablet, really, I've never heard of anyone having to ask who's gone for the pill and asked her, yeah, can you just take all your clothes off, please? What, all the gloves? No, everything. You don't get struck off for that, but veil, you're off. Laura Jane is in Hampshire. Laura Jane, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
I'm just appalled about this GP who's been struck off. But those of us who are women, and I dare to say that, have put up with male, and I dare to say that, doctors all our lives being condescending to us, whether it be in a GP situation or in a hospital, particularly male gynecologists. Very condescending to us women, very brusque, and making us feel quite small. And as usual, we never complained. But I could think of many occasions when I would like to have complained. Well, we would have complained. We
talked about this, by the sorry to interject, but we talked about this, was it yesterday or the day before, about women's healthcare being compromised in no small part due to the attitude of... some doctors, certainly in gynecology, where you would think, I mean, that would be an area where sensitivities you might think would be right to the top of the table, right? I mean, that would, but by definition of, nobody wants to be in a gynecology department, like any department, I suppose, but in particular when you're having issues or, you know, you need to get things checked out. So why would there be a disproportionate amount of doctors, you say particularly male doctors, who would have a mardy attitude when you're going there for care?
Because that was the sort of attitude in days gone by, and I mean, when I was having my 3 kids, that was the main reason why I had them at home, because I didn't want male doctors telling me how to give birth when really they've never done that before. Was it a classic area? Was it sort of old-fashioned sexism in a way? It was a classic area of male dominance, because here I am as the person that can make you better, more comfortable, save your life, whatever. So I'm a man. You're a woman. Look at this dynamic playing out. Yes, yeah, and that absolutely, and that if you think about it, female women were not allowed to be doctors because their brains weren't big enough, or I don't know what the excuses were. But it's outrageous that this woman has managed to get a man struck off, whereas there are many times where I have felt personal experience very small. And I think that's where the imbalance is that, you know, we wouldn't be allowed to complain. And in this situation, the tables have been turned. Somebody's complained and he's been struck off.
Unbelievable. Laura, listen, thank you. Laura Jane in Hampshire, thank you for that. So many subjects here this morning, from what is happening to Epsom, trans women, cross-dressing women, that kind of stuff. Here's Kevin O'Sullivan identifying as Julia Hartley-Brewer.
Hey, how are you?
It's the best I could do.
Quite a lot going
going around, isn't
there? Yeah, there's a massive amount of news this morning.
I know. I mean, when isn't there these days? And we
True.
haven't even got to any international affairs. Yeah.